Mum swooped.
He was invisible until the moment he wasn't. A maintenance technician, a single father, a man nobody looked at twice, until a knife came out in a crowded ballroom and every trained professional in the room froze while he moved. Madeline Vaughn had laughed at him 3 hours earlier. In front of cameras, investors, and her entire executive team, she had questioned why someone like him was standing near a VIP entrance. The room had laughed with her. 3 hours later, he saved her life. This is the story of Grayson Hale, the man everyone dismissed and no one ever forgot. If this story already has your attention, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The Meridian Grand was the kind of hotel that made people feel important just by walking through its doors. The ceilings in the main lobby rose 40 feet above the marble floors, framed by twin staircases that curved upward like the arms of something grand and deliberate. The chandeliers were real crystal, not the imitation kind you find in mid-range properties. And when the light hit them at the right angle in the late afternoon, they scattered color across the walls in a way that made guests stop mid-sentence and look up. The hotel's design team had worked 18 months on the lobby alone. Every detail was intentional. Every surface sent a message. The message was simple. You matter here. Of course, that message was selective. It was aimed at the guests with the reservation confirmations and the corporate accounts and the surnames that appeared in business publications. It was not aimed at the man in the gray uniform pushing a service cart through the staff corridor on the east side of the building at 7:42 in the morning. Grayson Hale moved through the hotel the way water moves through a pipe, efficiently, without ceremony, occupying exactly as much space as the job required. He was 32 years old, though he looked a little older than that on days when he hadn't slept well, which was most days. His hair was dark and cut practically short, not stylishly short. There was a faint scar along the line of his left jaw that most people never noticed because most people never looked at him closely enough to notice anything. He was maintenance, he was background. He was fine with that. The cart he pushed carried a replacement thermostat, a circuit diagnostic kit, 2 rolls of electrical tape, and a thermos of coffee that had gone lukewarm somewhere between the staff parking lot and the 3rd floor. He drank it anyway. It was the second thermos of the morning. His daughter, Lily, had woken at 5:15 with a bad dream about a wolf that could open doors, and by the time he'd settled her back down, made her a piece of toast, and checked that her backpack was ready for school, there wasn't time for a proper breakfast. There rarely was. He took a sip from the thermos as he rounded the corner toward the elevator bank, scanning the work order on his phone. Room 1114, HVAC malfunction. Guest complaint logged 6:47 a.m. Priority, high. Note, VIP suite. Handle with discretion. Discretion. That was the word they always used when they meant don't make noise, don't linger, don't remind the important people that the infrastructure holding their luxury together requires actual human beings to maintain it. Grayson had been working at the Meridian Grand for just over 14 months. Before that, there had been other work, contract security, consulting, a few months of teaching self-defense courses at a community gym, a brief and deeply uncomfortable period of trying to figure out what a man like him was supposed to do when he decided he was done being the kind of man he used to be. He didn't think about that period often. It wasn't useful to think about it. The elevator opened on the 11th floor, and he stepped out into the corridor, which smelled like fresh linen and the faint chemical sweetness of whatever the housekeeping team used on the carpets. He found room 1114 at the end of the hall, knocked twice, a habit, even though the guest had already complained and presumably wasn't there, and let himself in with the maintenance key. The suite was large. Not the largest in the hotel, but large enough. Whoever had booked it hadn't bothered to unpack fully. There was a single leather carry-on near the closet and a laptop open on the desk beside a half-finished bottle of mineral water. The curtains were still drawn. On the bedside table, a phone charger, a notepad covered in small, precise handwriting, and a folded copy of a business journal with a circle drawn around a headline. Grayson didn't read it. He crossed the room to the wall panel beside the bathroom door, popped the housing off the thermostat, and got to work. The problem with the HVAC unit turned out to be a relay switch that had partially failed. Common enough in older installations, easy to fix if you knew what you were looking at. He had it replaced and the unit running properly inside 22 minutes. He was repacking his tools when he heard voices in the corridor. Several of them, moving fast, the kind of voices that carried natural authority even when they weren't trying to. Grayson finished packing his cart, checked his work order, and wheeled the cart back toward the door. He opened it and stepped out into the hallway just as the group rounded the corner from the elevator bank. There were 7 of them. 4 assistants or junior staff members, distinguishable by the way they moved. Slightly behind, slightly angled toward the person at the center, their eyes tracking her for cues. 2 men who had the specific posture of people whose job was to be aware of the room at all times. And at the center of all of it, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that her time was worth more than other people's comfort, Madeline Vaughn. Grayson had seen her photograph. The hotel had circulated a briefing sheet to department heads when the Vaughn group booking came in, standard practice for high-profile guests. In the photo, she'd looked composed and corporate, the kind of professional headshot that could belong to any number of executives. In person, she was sharper than the photograph suggested. Early 30s, dark hair pulled back cleanly, a suit that probably cost more than 2 months of his salary. She was reading something on her phone as she walked, and she was still reading it when she looked up and saw Grayson standing in the corridor with his maintenance cart directly between her group and the door to the suite. She stopped. The group stopped with her. "Is there a problem?" she said. Not rude exactly, just direct. The kind of direct that assumed the inconvenience was his fault until proven otherwise. "No, ma'am," Grayson said. He moved the cart to the side, giving her a clear path. HVAC repair. All finished. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the cart, then back at him. It was a brief look, but it was the particular kind of brief that contained a full assessment. She had looked at him and placed him, category, utility, relevance, in about 2 seconds. "The thermostat was set incorrectly when I checked in last night," she said. "Relay switch on the main unit," he said. "It's been replaced. You'll have full climate control now." "It should have been handled before I arrived." "Yes, ma'am. You're right about that." She held his gaze for one more beat, then moved past him into the suite. Her team followed. One of the 2 security men, tall, broad, with a military haircut and watchful eyes, paused at the door and gave Grayson a single measured look before following the rest of them inside. The door closed. Grayson pushed his cart toward the service elevator. He didn't have much time to think about the encounter, because by 8:30 the day had acquired momentum of its own. The Meridian Grand was hosting what the event team called a major activation, the formal product launch for the Vaughn Group's flagship technology platform, which was being rolled out to institutional investors and industry partners before a wider public announcement scheduled for later in the quarter. The ballroom on the second floor had been in setup mode for 3 days. By the time Grayson arrived at the service entrance for the East Wing just before 9, the place had the specific controlled chaos of a large event in its final hours before everything had to look effortless. Caterers moving in both directions through the corridor, /V technicians arguing quietly about something near the stage door, event staff with clipboards and earpieces looking slightly too stressed for people whose job was supposed to be hospitality. And woven through all of it, the particular energy of money. The way a room changes when the people in it are operating at a scale where the numbers stop feeling abstract. Grayson's assignment for the morning was the ballroom's secondary electrical panel. One of the lighting rigs had been throwing an intermittent fault warning, and the event crew wanted it resolved before the room filled with investors who would notice if a spotlight flickered at the wrong moment. He checked in with the lead technician, got the panel location, and made his way toward it. The ballroom itself, stripped of its usual furniture and reconfigured for the launch, was genuinely impressive. The main stage had been constructed along the south wall, with a curved LED display that rose 15 feet and curved slightly at the top, the kind of setup you saw at tech conferences and major product announcements. Round tables filled the center floor, each set for 12, with linens and place settings that probably cost more per table than Grayson made in a week. The stage lighting was still being calibrated, and every few minutes the color of the room shifted as the AV team cycled through configurations. He found the secondary panel in a utility alcove off the East Service corridor, behind a door marked Authorized Personnel Only that was currently propped open with a milk crate. He set up his diagnostics kit and started working. 40 minutes into the job, he found the fault. A loose connection in one of the dimmer circuits, exacerbated by the heavier-than-usual load the event lighting was pulling. He fixed it, ran the diagnostic again, got a clean reading, and logged the repair. He was about to close the panel when something made him stop. Not a sound exactly, not a specific thing he could point to. Just a shift, a change in the quality of his awareness, the kind of thing that people who have spent years in certain environments learn to recognize because the alternative is not recognizing it. He turned around. Through the open service door across the corridor, he had a partial sight line into the ballroom's east entrance. And standing just inside that entrance, near a linen cart stacked with napkins and table covers, was a man in a catering uniform. The man was standing still. That was the thing. In a room full of people moving constantly, carrying things, adjusting things, talking to each other, checking lists, this man was standing still. He was looking at the stage. Grayson watched him for 20 seconds. The man didn't move. His eyes tracked something, the stage, specifically the area behind the podium, with a steadiness that had nothing to do with idle curiosity. His hands were loose at his sides. His weight was distributed evenly. He was not a person who was resting or waiting for instruction. He was a person who was assessing. Grayson recognized the posture. He had owned it himself a long time ago. He closed the electrical panel and walked toward the ballroom entrance. Up close, the man was maybe 35. Medium height, lean build. The catering uniform fit well. Not too perfectly, which was actually the tell. A real catering employee grabbed whatever was in their size from the staff wardrobe. This uniform looked like it had been chosen carefully, sized deliberately. The name badge on his lapel read Derek, the letters slightly too uniform, too centered. A real name badge was usually crooked or slightly faded from washing. Grayson picked up an empty tray from the station near the door and walked past the man, not stopping, not looking directly at him. As he passed, he glanced at the man's hands, specifically the right hand, which was slightly closer to the hip than the left. The fingers curled in a partial grip that had no purpose if you were carrying food. He set the tray down at the far end of the room and took out his phone, pretending to check something. The man had shifted his position slightly. Now, he was angled toward the area just left of the stage, where a narrow aisle led to the backstage corridor, the path the presenter would take to reach the podium. Grayson typed a note to himself. Time, 9:47. East entrance. Male, mid-30s, catering ID. Derek, static position. Stage fixation. Right-hand carry position. Monitor. Then he walked back out through the service corridor, found his cart, and pushed it toward the security station near the lobby. The head of hotel security that morning was a man named Phil Grady, who had been working hotel security for 23 years, and who had, over those 2 decades, developed the specific professional confidence of someone who has seen most things and been surprised by very few of them. He was in his mid-50s, heavyset, with a close-cropped gray beard and reading glasses perpetually perched on top of his head. He was reviewing something on his tablet when Grayson knocked on the open door of the security office. Hale. Grady looked up. What have you got? Grayson described what he had seen. He kept it factual, the position, the posture, the hand placement, the way the man was watching the stage rather than working. He didn't editorialize. He laid it out the way he would have laid out a briefing, once upon a time. Grady listened. When Grayson finished, Grady set down his tablet. You said he passed screening? I don't know if he's on the catering roster. That's what I'm asking you to check. The caterers all went through credential verification this morning. Every name badge in that room was cleared by 8 a.m. Grady rubbed his jaw. I appreciate you flagging it, Grayson. I'll have someone take a pass-through. His posture is I'll have someone take a pass-through, Grady said again, gently, firmly, a sentence with a full stop at the end of it. Grayson looked at him for a moment. Okay, he said. He went back to work. At 11:15, Grayson was in the loading bay off the north service entrance, signing off on a delivery of replacement bulbs for the corridor lighting on floors 4 through 7. His phone buzzed with a text from the school. Lily had a small incident at recess. She's okay. Come by if possible. He stared at the message for a moment, then called the school. It's Grayson Hale, he said when the front desk picked up. I got a message about my daughter. Hi, Mr. Hale. Yes, Lily's fine. She just got into a bit of a disagreement with another student. She's a little upset, but she's not hurt. We wanted you to know. What kind of disagreement? Another child said something unkind. Lily pushed back, verbally, just to be clear, nothing physical. She's in the counselor's office right now, and Mrs. Petrie says she's doing okay. We just thought you should know. He exhaled. Tell her I'll pick her up at the regular time. Tell her... He paused, thinking about Lily and what she needed to hear right now. Tell her I'm proud of her for sticking up for herself. A brief silence. I'll pass that along, Mr. Hale. He hung up and stood for a moment with the phone in his hand, feeling the specific weight of being a person in two places at once. Fully here, fully there, never quite enough of either. Then he pocketed the phone, signed off on the delivery, and went back inside. He ate lunch at 12:30 in the staff break room on the lower level, a sandwich he'd made that morning at 5:30 while Lily was still sleeping. Turkey, mustard, a slightly wilted piece of lettuce that he'd considered throwing away, and then kept because wasting food felt wrong, and also because he'd forgotten to buy more lettuce the last 2 grocery runs. The break room was small, with a round table that sat 6 and a television mounted to the wall that someone had left on a cable news channel with the volume down. 3 other staff members were in the room, 2 from housekeeping, 1 from the kitchen, and the conversation was the usual mix of complaints about the event setup and speculation about which of the VIP guests was the most demanding. Grayson ate his sandwich and listened without contributing. He was good at that. The Vaughn woman had her room service redone twice this morning, said one of the housekeeping staff. A woman named Dee, who had been at the hotel longer than almost anyone and who had strong opinions about everything. Twice. First she said the temperature was wrong, then she said the presentation was wrong. I've seen demanding, but that is... She's got a big launch today, the kitchen staff member said. That kind of pressure, you'd be picky too. Picky about presentation at 7 in the morning? Some people need to remember that there are other people in the world, Dee said, and that was the end of that. Grayson finished his sandwich, rinsed his container in the small sink, and went back to work. At 1:45, he passed the VIP entrance on the hotel's east side, a secondary entry point near the ballroom that had been designated for the Vaughn Group's executives and their guests. It was a nice entrance, private, away from the main lobby traffic, with a small anteroom where guests could collect themselves before entering the event space. The hotel had placed fresh flower arrangements there that morning, tall white things in narrow vases. Grayson was passing through because his route to the 3rd-floor mechanical room went through the east wing, and the east wing corridor ran alongside the VIP entrance. He was not stopping. He had no reason to stop. He stopped because the door to the anteroom was open, and Madeline Vaughn was standing just inside it with 2 of her senior people. And she saw him before he saw her, and by the time he was aware of her gaze, he was already in the middle of the corridor, maintenance cart in tow. No natural way to not be exactly where he was. Her eyes went to him, then to the cart. Then she said something to the man beside her, a phrase Grayson didn't catch, and the man beside her turned and looked and laughed. A short sound, easy and dismissive, the kind of laugh that doesn't require much effort because the source of amusement isn't complicated. Madeline Vaughn stepped slightly forward into the corridor and addressed him directly. Are you supposed to be in this wing right now? Grayson stopped pushing the cart. I have access clearance for the whole building, ma'am. I'm heading to the mechanical room on 3. Through the VIP entrance? Through the east wing corridor, which runs adjacent to it. I'm not entering your event space. He kept his voice level. If you prefer a different route, I can... What's your name? Grayson Hale. Maintenance. She looked at him, then at the cart. The cart had, at that precise moment, a slightly bent corner on the upper shelf where he'd bumped it into a doorframe that morning, and a grease mark near the wheel assembly that he hadn't gotten around to wiping off. He was aware of both of these things suddenly, and with inappropriate clarity. "I'm trying to understand," Madeline said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite contempt, but was adjacent to it, a kind of baffled impatience. "Why maintenance is routing through a VIP corridor 2 hours before a major event. It's the most efficient route to the mechanical room." "Could you find a less efficient route?" The man beside her laughed again. A woman on his other side smiled at her phone, not quite hiding it. "Of course," Grayson said. He looked at her. She looked back at him. "I'll find another way." He turned his cart around and went back the way he came. He did not say anything else. There was nothing useful to say, and he had learned a long time ago that responding to that particular kind of dismissal with visible emotion was a waste of everyone's time, including his own. You registered it. You set it down. You kept moving. He kept moving. But he took the long way around through the north corridor, past the utility stairwell, and as he passed the ballroom service entrance, he slowed, not stopping, just slowing, and glanced through the partially open door. The man in the catering uniform was still in there, different position now, closer to the stage, still watching. Watch. At 2:15, Grayson made a second visit to the security station. This time Grady wasn't there. A younger officer named Brandon was covering the station, early 20s, sharp enough, but visibly preoccupied with the radio traffic from the event floor, where the AV team was having some kind of disagreement with the event coordinator about the lighting sequence for the CEO's entrance. "I need to flag something," Grayson said. Brandon held up a finger 1 second and spoke into his radio. Then he turned back. "What's up, Hale?" "The individual I reported to Grady this morning, the one by the east entrance. He's moved closer to the stage. He's been in that room for over 4 hours, and I've never seen him actually do any catering work. No plates, no service setup, no interaction with the other staff." Brandon frowned. "Grady said he was on the verified list." "I know what Grady said. I'm telling you what I'm seeing." Brandon picked up his tablet, scrolled through something. Derek Solis, on the contract catering roster, cleared at 7:58 a.m. Photo ID, background check processed by the event company. "I understand the paperwork checked out. I'm talking about behavior." "Hale," Brandon started. 4 hours, Grayson said. "In a room full of people working, this man has not worked. He's been watching the stage. His hand position suggests he's carrying something under the left side of his jacket." A pause. "You got eyes on a weapon?" Brandon asked. "No, I'm saying his hand position is consistent with someone who's concealing something." Brandon looked at him, then at his tablet, then back at him. There was something behind his eyes that wasn't quite dismissal, more like the specific uncertainty of someone who doesn't want to be wrong in either direction. "I'll radio Grady," he said finally. "Good," Grayson said. "Thank you." He walked back toward the ballroom. He wasn't done watching. The event was scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock, with Madeline Vaughn's keynote address at 4:30. By 3, the hotel had reached the specific kind of organized chaos that precedes large functions. Guests beginning to arrive in the lobby, staff doing final checks, the slight elevation in ambient noise and energy that meant everything was real now, no longer theoretical. Grayson had no official reason to be near the ballroom. His work orders for the afternoon were on the 4th floor, 2 room checks and a door mechanism that had been sticking. He completed them. Both room checks were clean. The door mechanism required a minor adjustment to the strike plate and took 12 minutes. At 3:27, he was on the elevator going back down. He didn't consciously decide what he was going to do. It was more that by the time the elevator doors opened on the lobby level and he stepped out into the noise and movement of the hotel at full activation, he already knew. The same way he had always known, in a different life, when something was wrong in a room. Not from a single piece of evidence, but from the accumulation of small things that, taken together, stopped adding up to anything except a problem. He walked to the ballroom service entrance, pushed through it, and came out on the east side of the room. The space was nearly full now. Round tables occupied by people who wore the specific calm of those accustomed to large sums of money and the events that orbited them. The stage was lit. The LED display cycling through a holding pattern, Vaughn Group logo rendered in clean blue and white. At the rear of the room, a service station where catering staff moved with the focused rhythm of people who had done this 100 times. Grayson scanned the room. The man was not at his previous position by the stage. Grayson moved his gaze methodically. North wall, east entrance, the bar set up near the west exit, the corridor that led backstage. There, near the backstage corridor entrance, still wearing the uniform, still in a room full of motion. Grayson walked toward him. He wasn't running. There was no scenario in which running across a ballroom at a catering staff member ended well. He walked with the measured pace of someone who had somewhere specific to be and knew exactly why. As he crossed the room, he passed a table where 3 executives were talking about market positioning, and he heard the words Q4 projection and leverage without processing them. He passed a linen cart and a server carrying a tray of water glasses, and a hotel manager speaking quietly into an earpiece. He was 8 feet from the man when the man turned and saw him coming. Their eyes met. In that moment, that single second of held contact, Grayson saw it. The instant assessment, the decision, the brief flicker of calculation behind the man's eyes that had nothing to do with catering or events or any of the machinery of the normal world. Grayson kept walking. "Excuse me," he said. He pulled out his hotel ID badge, the laminated one with his name and the Meridian Grand logo, the kind of credential that looks modest and is. "Maintenance staff, I'm going to need to see your employee identification." The man looked at the badge, then at Grayson, then at the badge again. "Sure," he said. The word was flat, without inflection. His right hand moved toward his jacket. Grayson tracked the movement. He had tracked it before the man's elbow even shifted, and knew before the hand completed its path that it wasn't going for a badge. The ballroom moved around them, oblivious. The hand came out with a knife. Ryan Mercer saw the blade from across the room. He was good at his job. 15 years in close protection, multiple high-profile clients, a reputation for reading situations before they fully developed. When he saw the flash of metal and registered the maintenance worker in the gray uniform standing 2 feet from the threat, his brain completed an assessment in approximately 1 second, and the assessment said, "Civilian in the way of the attacker." He moved, fast, trained, decisive, exactly the way he was supposed to move. He covered the distance between himself and the threat in under 4 seconds, his hand already reaching for his arm, already set to pull the gray uniformed man aside and neutralize the attacker behind him. He got close enough to grab Grayson's arm. And then several things happened, in a sequence so fast that the people watching from the nearest tables would later describe it differently depending on where they were standing. Grayson's free hand came up and redirected Ryan's grip. Not violently, not with force, but with the clean, economical precision of someone who had trained the movement until it was automatic. Ryan's momentum continued past him, redirected, and he found himself pivoting to the side rather than forward. In the same motion, Grayson stepped into the attacker's reach, inside the arc of the blade, close enough that the weapon became a liability rather than an advantage. His left hand controlled the knife arm at the wrist, rotating sharply. His right forearm connected with the man's elbow in a short, controlled strike. There was a sound. The knife hit the carpet. Grayson stepped through, took the man's arm behind his back, and brought him down to one knee with the quiet efficiency of someone finishing a sentence. "Don't," Grayson said. Quietly, directly. The man stopped moving. The entire sequence had taken, by most witness estimates, between 4 and 6 seconds. Ryan Mercer stood to the side, his hand still extended from the redirect, staring. The ballroom chair, which had registered the movement and the sound but had not yet fully assembled the information into coherent understanding, began to understand. The silence came in a wave, table by table, spreading from the epicenter outward until the entire room was still. 200 people who had been talking and drinking and checking their phones and thinking about Q4 projections were all looking at the same thing. A man in a gray maintenance uniform holding an attacker on the floor of the ballroom with the calm, unhurried posture of someone who had done this before and found it unremarkable. From the side of the stage, framed by the blue light of the LED display, Madeline Vaughn watched. Her face was composed. It was the face of someone who was working very hard to remain composed, which is different, but from a distance the difference wasn't visible. Hotel security came through the service entrance at a run, 30 seconds after it was over. Grayson looked up at the first officer through the door. "Call the police," he said, "and someone get a zip tie." Awesome. In the controlled chaos of the following 20 minutes, police called, attacker restrained, guests moved to the secondary event room while the ballroom was secured. Grayson sat on a chair near the service entrance and answered questions from a hotel manager and then from a detective who arrived faster than he'd expected. His daughter's school pickup was at 3:45. He checked his watch. It was 3:51. He took out his phone and called Mrs. Petrie's cell, the teacher he'd exchanged numbers with last month after a school event where Lily had won a math competition and he'd been late to the celebration and felt terrible about it. "Mr. Hale, hi, I'm going to be late. I'm sorry. It's not. I'm okay, but I'm at work and there's a situation. Is there any chance Lily can wait in the front office for another—" "She's right here," Mrs. Petrie said. Her voice was warm, uncomplicated. "We'll get her a snack. Take your time." He exhaled. "Thank you. Tell her I'm coming." "I will." He hung up and looked at the detective, who was watching him with the particular attentiveness of someone reassessing their initial impression. "You were saying," the detective said, "you first noticed the subject at approximately 9:47. "Correct," Grayson said. "I'll walk you through it from the beginning." And he did. Precisely, thoroughly, without embellishment. The way he had been trained to, once upon a time, in a different life, before he learned that some things in the world mattered more than the work. Outside the ballroom, the hotel hummed with its usual machinery. Somewhere on the other side of the building, in the secondary event space where the guests had been relocated, someone was pouring water and smoothing down tablecloths and checking the microphone levels. The Meridian Grand was good at continuing. It was built for that. So was Grayson Hale, in his own way. He sat in his gray uniform on a folding chair in the service corridor and answered the detective's questions and waited, quietly, to go get his daughter. The detective's name was Harlan Cook, and he had been doing this long enough to know when someone was giving him a performance versus giving him information. Grayson Hale was giving him information. He sat in the folding chair with his hands in his lap and his voice at the same register it had probably been at for the past 8 hours. Steady, unhurried, specific. He didn't editorialize. He didn't offer interpretations or theories. He described what he had seen, when he had seen it, what he had done, and why. The timeline he laid out was precise enough that Cook had to check it twice against the hotel's camera logs, and when he did, it matched. Not approximately matched. Actually matched. "You said you reported your concern to hotel security twice," Cook said. "Correct. Once to Phil Grady at approximately 9:50, and once to an officer named Brandon at approximately 2:15. And neither of them acted on it. Grady said he'd have someone take a pass-through. I don't know if that happened. Brandon said he'd radio Grady." Cook made a note. "Why didn't you push harder?" Grayson looked at him. "I pushed as hard as my position allowed. I'm maintenance. I have no authority over security operations. When I flagged it the second time, I made it as specific as I could, and then I went back to watching because that was the only thing I was still able to do. And when you decided to approach him yourself, the event was 40 minutes from starting. I'd seen him shift position 3 times, each time moving closer to the backstage access. At some point, waiting for someone else to act stops being professional restraint and starts being a decision with consequences." Cook studied him for a moment. "You have formal training." It wasn't a question, but Grayson answered it anyway. "I did. It was a long time ago." "What kind of training?" "Executive protection, close quarters threat assessment, and response." He said it the way someone describes a previous address. Factual, without weight. Cook set down his pen. "You want to tell me why a former executive protection specialist is working hotel maintenance?" "Not particularly," Grayson said. Then, after a pause, "But I'll tell you what's relevant to your investigation. The rest isn't." The detective looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen again. "Fair enough," he said. The police secured the ballroom by 4:30. The attacker, the man who'd been wearing a badge that said Derek, was in the back of a patrol car by 4:40, his wrists in zip ties, saying nothing. He had said nothing since the moment Grayson brought him down, which the officers noted was unusual. Most people talked. Fear made them talk. This one sat with his jaw set and his eyes fixed somewhere in the middle distance, which told Cook something, though he wasn't yet sure what. The knife was bagged and tagged, a folding blade, 4-inch, the kind you could buy at a sporting goods store or order online without documentation. Unremarkable as a weapon, which was the point, it had been in his jacket pocket, specifically in a custom sewn-in sleeve on the lining, not the standard pocket, which meant the uniform had been modified before he'd put it on. That level of preparation told Cook this wasn't impulsive. The caterer's employee ID, Derek Solis, turned out to be a well-made forgery. The real Derek Solis was a 48-year-old food service worker who'd called in sick that morning and was, when the police reached him by phone, watching television at his apartment across town with no idea his identity had been borrowed. The man in custody had no ID on him at all. By 5 o'clock, they had a fingerprint match from the federal database, and Cook was standing in the hotel parking lot on his phone getting the specifics from his lieutenant. The man's name was Paul Crenshaw, 37 years old, prior convictions for assault and extortion, known associate of a network of contractors who'd been loosely connected to a number of corporate intimidation cases over the past 6 years, cases that shared a common thread of targeting executives involved in legal disputes with a specific class of business player. "Who hired him?" Cook asked. "Working on it," his lieutenant said. "Could take a day or two. The trail's layered." "It always is," Cook said, and hung up. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, in the cooling air of the late afternoon, thinking about the maintenance worker sitting inside on a folding chair who had seen all of this coming before anyone with actual authority and training had bothered to look. Inside, the secondary event space had been converted into something between a waiting room and a debrief center. Most of the guests had been quietly informed that the afternoon's event was postponed and offered complimentary drinks, which a meaningful number of them had accepted. A smaller cluster, the senior Vaughn Group executives and Madeline's immediate team, had gathered in one of the private dining rooms adjacent to the main corridor. Ryan Mercer was in that room. He was sitting at the far end of the table with a glass of water in front of him that he hadn't touched, his elbows on the table and his hands pressed together in front of his mouth, in the particular posture of a man engaged in a very uncomfortable private argument with himself. He was 38 years old and had been in close protection since he was 23. He had worked 7 different principals over that time, 3 corporate executives, 2 entertainment figures, 1 diplomat, 1 private family. He had never lost a client. He had never had an incident that he hadn't controlled. His professional record was, by any reasonable measure, excellent. He was currently trying to figure out how a hotel maintenance worker had redirected him mid-approach and neutralized a threat before Ryan's brain had finished processing what was happening. The answer was obvious enough. The man was trained. Differently trained, probably, or trained to a level Ryan hadn't encountered much in the private sector. The redirect had been textbook. Not aggressive, not defensive, just efficient. The kind of move that comes from so many repetitions that it happens before conscious thought. Ryan knew the principle. He'd trained it himself. The execution he'd encountered in that ballroom was better than his. That was uncomfortable. He sat with the discomfort because there wasn't a useful alternative. Across the table, Madeline was on her phone. She had been on her phone almost continuously since they'd moved her out of the ballroom, which Ryan recognized as her primary coping mechanism. When the world became unmanageable, she managed the parts of it she could reach through a screen. He'd observed it over the 2 years he'd worked for her. It was effective, up to a point. She wasn't panicking, he'd give her that. Whatever was happening under the surface, and something was definitely happening under the surface, he could see it in the set of her shoulders and the way she kept closing her eyes for 1 beat longer than a blink. She was holding it together in the ways that mattered. She ended a call and set the phone on the table and looked at the window for a moment. "Where's the maintenance worker?" she said. Ryan looked up. "With the detective, last I knew." "Has anyone checked on him?" A brief silence. "He seemed fine," said Carter Novak, her chief of staff, who was sitting to her left and whose primary contribution to the past hour had been saying reassuring things that weren't quite true. He was good at that. It was part of the job. Madeline looked at Carter for a moment. He faced down an armed man in the middle of our event, and nobody from our team has gone to see if he's okay. Carter opened his mouth. That's a problem, Carter. Carter closed his mouth. Madeline looked at Ryan. When you have a chance to speak with him, I'd like you to bring him in. If he's willing. She paused. Please. Ryan nodded. Yes, ma'am. Grayson was finishing with the detective when Ryan found him. He was standing now, stretching his back slightly, his gray uniform still carrying the evidence of a full workday, a smear of grease near the left cuff, the slight dust of the electrical panel work from the morning. He looked tired, not the rattled kind of tired that comes from adrenaline crashing, the regular kind, the kind built from 4:45 a.m. alarms and a commute and 8 hours of physical work and a daughter who'd had a hard day at school. Ryan stopped a few feet away and waited until Grayson saw him. When Grayson turned and registered who was standing there, his face did not change significantly. A small adjustment, the kind you make when you're recalibrating the social parameters of an unexpected interaction. That was all. Mercer, Grayson said. Ryan had not given Grayson his name, which meant Grayson had gotten it from somewhere, which was, Ryan noted, exactly the kind of thing someone trained in his world would automatically do. Hale, Ryan said. He paused. Then, I need to say something to you. Grayson waited. In the ballroom, when I came across the room. Ryan kept his voice even, but the words were not easy. I read you wrong. My approach. I treated you as the secondary threat, and I shouldn't have. That was an error in my assessment, and you corrected it. He looked at Grayson steadily. You did it cleanly, and you didn't make it worse when you didn't have to. I want you to know that I understand what you did, and why. Grayson studied him for a moment with the focused attention of someone weighing the sincerity behind the words. Appreciate that, he said. Where'd you train? That's a long answer. I've got time. I don't, actually. Grayson glanced at his watch. I have to pick up my daughter. Ryan blinked. It was such a specific, ordinary sentence, dropped into the wreckage of the afternoon like a coffee cup on a battlefield. His daughter. Of course. Right, he said. Ms. Vaughn wanted to speak with you, if you're willing. It doesn't have to be tonight. Grayson was quiet for a moment. Tell her I said she's all right, and the threat's been handled. That's the main thing. She knows that. I think she wants to thank you properly. She doesn't have to. I know she doesn't have to. A long pause. Grayson picked up the jacket he'd folded over the back of the chair. A worn canvas thing, personal, not professional, the kind of jacket that had been through a lot of seasons. Tomorrow morning, he said, my shift starts at 7. She can find me before that if she wants. I'll tell her. Grayson walked toward the lobby exit. Ryan watched him go and thought, not for the first time, and with the specific interest of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at, that whoever had trained Grayson Hale had trained him extremely well. Yet, Lily was in the front office when he got there, sitting in one of the plastic chairs beside the reception desk with her backpack on her lap and a half-eaten package of crackers beside her. She was 8 years old, with dark hair like his, and eyes that she'd gotten from somewhere else. A particular shade of brown-green that caught light in a way Grayson sometimes found startling. She was reading a library book with the focused intensity that meant she was either genuinely absorbed or performing absorption to avoid having to talk to the adults in the room. When she looked up and saw him, the performance dropped. You're late, she said. I know. I'm sorry. He crouched down in front of her so their faces were level. You okay? She considered the question with the seriousness she brought to most things. Mrs. Petrie said you were proud of me. I am. Even though I got in trouble? You didn't get in trouble. You stuck up for yourself. Those aren't the same thing. She thought about this. Then she looked at his sleeve, specifically the grease mark on the left cuff, and wrinkled her nose. You got dirty. It was a complicated day. She slid off the chair, settled her backpack onto her shoulders, and took his hand in the matter-of-fact way she'd been doing since she was 3, as though the gesture required no commentary. They walked out through the front doors and into the cooling evening, and the school behind them hummed with the quiet noise of an institution settling into its after-hours self. "What did the kids say?" Grayson asked, after they'd walked half a block. Lily was quiet for a moment. "He said my lunch looked weird." Grayson looked at her. "Your lunch?" "The rice. He said it smelled funny and that my dad probably didn't know how to cook." She said it flatly, in the tone children use when they're working very hard to sound like it doesn't matter. Grayson was quiet for a moment. "What did you say to him?" "I said my dad knows how to cook a lot of things, and that his opinion wasn't asked for." She paused. "Then I said he could go find something useful to do." That last part was probably unnecessary. "I know. But the first part was correct." She looked up at him sidelong, checking his face, and whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. They walked the rest of the block in the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need to fill every space with words. At the corner, waiting for the light, Lily said, "Can we have the rice again tonight?" "Yeah," Grayson said, we can have the rice." Well, he made dinner while she did homework at the kitchen table. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a galley kitchen that required a specific choreography to navigate properly when more than one person was trying to use it. He'd lived here for 11 months, since the move from the place they'd been renting when they first arrived in the city, which had been cheaper but further from Lily's school and had a mold problem in the bathroom that the landlord kept promising to address. This apartment was fine. The kitchen worked, the heat worked, the building was quiet. He'd learned to stop applying adjectives to it beyond fine and works. He had a rice cooker that Lily had picked out at a kitchen supply sale 8 months ago. She'd been inexplicably enchanted by it, and while it ran, he cut vegetables and marinated the chicken in a sauce he made from memory, rough measurements, adjusting by smell and instinct because he had never been the kind of person who cooked from a written recipe. His mother had cooked that way. He'd learned it from her without either of them ever noticing it was being learned. From the table, Lily said, "Dad, what's 642 divided by 3? 214. A pause. "How do you do that so fast?" "Practice." Another pause, longer. "Will I be able to do it that fast someday?" "If you practice, yeah." She went back to her worksheet. The rice cooker clicked. Grayson flipped the chicken and thought briefly about the afternoon. Not about the threat or the attacker or the sequence of the response, but about the moment just before it. The moment he had been standing in the ballroom corridor with his cart, watching the man in the catering uniform watch the stage and feeling the specific weight of being in a position where you know something and nobody will listen. He had spent a lot of his life knowing things that other people weren't positioned to see. It was useful when it was valued. It was something else when it wasn't. He'd stopped needing it to be valued. That had been one of the harder lessons. He wasn't sure he'd fully learned it, but he was working on it. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah." "You smell like work still." "I'll shower after dinner." "You smell like work and something else." She looked up from her worksheet with the expression she used when she was being particular. "Like metal." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, it was a complicated day." She watched him for a second. That look she had, careful and precise. The one that sometimes made him feel like she understood more than she was supposed to. Then she went back to her homework. After dinner, after the dishes, after Lily's bath, and the book they read together before lights out. A chapter of something involving a girl detective and a stolen map that Lily had declared was the best book ever written, as she declared about every book they were currently reading. Grayson sat at the kitchen table with his phone and a glass of water. There were 3 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. They'd come in during dinner. He'd seen them and ignored them. Now he looked at them again. All from the same number, all within a 20-minute window around 7 p.m. No voicemail left. He set the phone down without calling back. He knew roughly what the calls were. Word moved fast in the world they occupied. The world of security professionals and corporate protection and event management, and a hotel maintenance worker disarming an attacker in a ballroom full of executives was the kind of story that crossed networks before the police report was even filed. Someone who knew him from before would have heard. Someone was already recalibrating what they thought they knew about where he'd ended up. He didn't have the energy to deal with that tonight. He pulled his laptop toward him and opened the work order system for the hotel, filed the completed repairs from the day, and cross-referenced the maintenance schedule for tomorrow. There was a roof access inspection on the docket for the morning and 2 outstanding work orders on the 6th floor that he'd pushed back twice and needed to actually handle. Normal work, the kind that asked nothing of him except attention and competence. He closed the laptop. The apartment was quiet. The city outside the window made its usual sounds. A car somewhere, a distant horn, the soft noise of other people's lives continuing. Lily was asleep. He could hear the particular quality of silence that came from her room when she was actually down, different from the tense quiet of a child lying awake. He thought about what Ryan Mercer had said. "I read you wrong." He thought about the ease with which those words had been spoken. Not easy in the sense of painless, but easy in the sense of direct. The man had been wrong, and he'd said so without architecture around it. Grayson had respected that. He thought about Madeline Vaughn and the way she had looked at him in the ballroom in the moments after he'd brought Crenshaw down. That expression he hadn't been able to fully read. Not gratitude? Not exactly. Something more complicated than gratitude, more internal. The expression of someone reorganizing a picture they thought they'd understood. He knew that expression. He'd worn it himself, at different points in his life, when reality had refused to match the model he'd built of it. He drank the rest of his water, rinsed the glass, turned off the kitchen light. He checked the door, locked, and the windows, latched, out of habit so old it no longer registered as conscious action. He checked Lily's door, open a few inches the way she liked it. She was curled on her side with one arm around the worn stuffed rabbit that she claimed she was too old for, but brought into bed every night regardless. He watched her for a moment. This was the thing he had chosen. This specific life, this specific smallness, this apartment, and this job and this child sleeping in the next room with her rabbit, and her book, and her opinion about other people's rice. He had chosen it deliberately, and he did not regret it, even on the days, like today, when it collided with what he used to be. The collision was uncomfortable. It passed. He went to bed. At 7:46 the next morning, Grayson was in the service corridor on the 2nd floor, reviewing the inspection schedule on his phone, when he heard footsteps coming from the lobby direction, the particular cadence of more than one person moving with intention. He looked up. Madeline Vaughn was walking toward him. She was alone, which was notable given that she had not been alone once in the entire time he had observed her. She was wearing clothes that were different from yesterday's, still professional, still measured. But there was something in her bearing that was different too. Slightly less armor, not vulnerability exactly, more like the specific composure of someone who had decided to do something they found difficult and had decided to do it anyway. She stopped 3 feet from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're earlier than I expected," Grayson said. "I didn't sleep particularly well," Madeline said. "Understandable." She looked at him directly, the way she had yesterday in the ballroom, that 2-second assessment, except this time the assessment was followed by something different. Her jaw worked slightly before she spoke. "Yesterday, by the VIP entrance, what I said, the way I spoke to you, you don't have to—" "I do," she said. Quiet, but firm. "I was dismissive and I was condescending and I was wrong about what I was seeing. And then in front of your colleagues, She stopped. "I made you feel like you were in the wrong place. And I was wrong." Grayson looked at her. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere above them, the hotel was beginning its morning. Distant sounds of housekeeping, the elevator, someone speaking into a radio 3 floors up. "I've been dismissed from a lot of rooms," he said finally. "You weren't the first." "That doesn't make it—" "No, it doesn't." He met her gaze. "But I accept the apology." She breathed out slowly. Some of the armor settled. Not all of it. He suspected all of it was never fully off. But some. "Ryan told me you have some background in executive protection," she said. "I did. A while back." "Why hotel maintenance?" He considered the questions. Not whether to answer it, but how. My daughter needed a father who came home at the same time every day, who was in the same city every week, who was present. He said it without apology and without elaboration, the way you state a fact about load-bearing architecture. The other work wasn't compatible with that. Madeline was quiet for a moment. How old is she? 8. He watched her face register the answer. Not with pity, he was relieved to see, but with something more like recognition, as though she was solving a problem she'd been handed and the answer was clarifying rather than surprising. The launch is being rescheduled for tomorrow, she said. We're still sorting out the investigation. Detective Cook has been thorough. She paused. They believe the attacker was contracted, someone connected to a previous legal dispute with our company. Have they identified who hired him? Not yet. Her voice stayed even, but something in her expression tightened slightly. They're working on it. Grayson nodded. He was already thinking about the logistics of the secondary threat window. If Crenshaw was contracted rather than acting on personal motivation, then whoever had hired him still had a problem they wanted solved, and a failed contractor meant only a brief delay in that intention, not its abandonment. He almost said this. Then he stopped, because it wasn't his problem anymore, and because Ryan Mercer was a competent professional who would be thinking exactly the same thing, and because Grayson Hale was a hotel maintenance technician whose shift started at 7 and who had a roof inspection at 8:30. Be careful with the second-day window, he said instead. Simple, factual, a single sentence she could pass on or not. Madeline looked at him. Meaning, if this was contracted, the contractor's problem didn't disappear when the first attempt failed. It just got postponed. He held her gaze. Your security team will know what to do with that information. I'm just flagging it. A beat of silence. Thank you, she said. This time without the complication. Just the 2 words, direct and plain. He nodded once. Then he looked back at his phone, at the inspection schedule, at the ordinary machinery of his ordinary morning. I have a roof access check at 8:30, he said. If you'll excuse me. He walked past her down the corridor. Behind him, he heard her exhale. Not loudly, just a breath that carried a little more weight than the usual kind. Then the sound of her footsteps heading back toward the lobby. He pushed through the door to the stairwell and went back to work. The roof of the Meridian Grand was not a place most people in the hotel ever thought about. It was functional, not scenic, a flat expanse of membrane roofing punctuated by HVAC units, YAS ventilation stacks, and the mechanical housings for the elevator systems. There was a perimeter barrier, waist-high, that kept the space from being actively dangerous, and a weather station mounted on a pole near the north edge that fed data to the building management system. In winter, the drain lines iced up and had to be checked manually. In summer, the membrane expanded in the heat and developed small stress cracks that needed monitoring. It was the kind of work that happened invisibly, that nobody noticed until it stopped being done. Grayson liked it up here. He wouldn't have said that to anyone because saying it invited questions about why, and the answer, that there was something clarifying about being in a place where the only things present were the work and the weather, was the kind of answer that sounded more philosophical than he intended. So he kept it to himself and did the inspection without commentary. He moved methodically across the roof surface, checking the drain assemblies in sequence, crouching at each one to clear debris and check the seals. The morning was overcast, the city below moving through its early routines in the gray light. He could see 3 blocks in each direction from up here, the traffic pattern on the avenue, the coffee cart on the corner that was always busy from 7 to 9, the parking structure across the street where a man in a yellow jacket was arguing with an attendant about something that required large hand gestures. Normal world, ordinary morning. He finished the drain inspection, moved to the HVAC units, checked the housing seals and the condenser coils on the 2 units that had been flagged for monitoring. Both were within acceptable parameters. He logged the readings on his phone and moved to the elevator mechanicals. His phone buzzed. He checked it. A text from a number he'd saved the night before under a single letter, R, for Ryan Mercer, who had sent him his contact information via the hotel's internal messaging system at 6:43 that morning with a message that said only, in case anything comes up. RM. The text now said, she took your advice. We've tripled the sweep protocol for today's event. Secondary perimeter going in at noon. Wanted you to know. Grayson read it, typed back, good. Then he put the phone in his pocket and went back to the elevator housing. He was not going to get involved in the event security. That was not his job, not his world, not his life. He had said what needed saying, and the right people had heard it. That was enough. He almost believed it. By 10:30, the hotel had begun its second act of the Vaughn Group saga, and the energy was different from the day before. More careful, more deliberate. The staff who moved through the corridors carried themselves with the slight stiffness of people who had been briefed on yesterday's incident and were now operating with the particular heightened attention that follows a near miss. The event team was back, reconfiguring the ballroom with the muted efficiency of professionals who understood that acknowledging what had happened directly would make it worse. So they simply worked harder and faster and said less. Grayson had 6 work orders for the morning. He moved through them in sequence. A light fixture in the 3rd floor meeting room, a pressure issue in the 4th floor plumbing, a guest room on the 7th floor where the electronic door lock was refusing to cooperate with the key card system. He fixed each one. He logged each one. He drank his coffee, which was better today because he'd had time to make it properly, and he did not think about the event on the 2nd floor, except he kept thinking about the event on the 2nd floor. Not because he wanted to be involved, because his brain wouldn't fully disengage from the variables, and his brain had never been particularly cooperative about letting go of a problem it had decided to hold. He knew the secondary threat window. He knew how contractors thought. He knew, in the way you know the smell of smoke before you've confirmed the fire, that Paul Crenshaw's failure hadn't resolved the underlying problem. It had just introduced a new set of pressures on whoever had sent him. The question was whether those pressures would produce a second move, and if so, when. He was on the 4th floor when his phone rang. Not a text this time. An actual call from the same unknown number that had tried 3 times last night. He stopped walking, looked at the number, answered it. Hale. The voice on the other end was familiar in the way old furniture is familiar. You recognize it before you've consciously identified it, from the shape of it, the weight. Donovan, Grayson said. Marcus Donovan had been one of the senior coordinators at the firm, where Grayson had done most of his principal work. A man in his late 50s now, probably, who had spent 30 years building one of the more respected private security operations on the East Coast. He was not a person who called without reason, and he was not a person who made small talk before reason. I heard about the Meridian Grand, Donovan said. Word travels. Always has. You want to tell me what a man with your background is doing working hotel maintenance? Not particularly. A pause. You doing all right? Lily doing all right? We're fine, Marcus. I know you're fine. That's not what I asked. Grayson leaned against the corridor wall, lowering his voice as a housekeeper passed with a cart. What do you need? Nothing. I'm calling because I heard what you did and because you've been off the grid for 3 years and nobody knew where you landed, and I wanted to... Donovan stopped. The pause was not the kind that precedes nothing. I've been thinking about you since you left. I didn't handle the end of things well, the transition. I should have... There were better ways I could have supported what you were going through. Grayson was quiet for a moment. The corridor hummed around him. The ventilation system, the distant sound of a television through a closed door, the wheels of the housekeeper's cart getting smaller. It's in the past, Grayson said. That doesn't mean I handled it right. No, Grayson said. It doesn't. He didn't soften it, but he didn't put an edge on it either. It was just a fact, offered plainly. But it's still in the past. Another pause. If you ever wanted to come back to the work, I don't. Not full principal coverage. Consultation. Training. The kind of hours that would work around Marcus. Right, Donovan said. The word landed without resentment. Right. I hear you. He exhaled. Take care of yourself, Grayson. Take care of the girl. I always do. He hung up and stood for a moment with the phone in his hand, feeling the conversation settle around him like weather passing. There was something in hearing Donovan's voice that he hadn't expected. Not nostalgia exactly, more like the particular discomfort of a scar that doesn't hurt anymore until someone presses on it. He pocketed the phone and kept moving. Thud. At 11:58, Grayson was passing through the lobby on his way to the service corridor when he saw Phil Grady moving toward him with the expression of a man who had spent the morning with something uncomfortable and had decided to address it before noon. Grady stopped in front of him. The lobby moved around them. Check-ins, bellhops, the ambient noise of a full-service hotel operating at capacity. "I wanted to talk to you," Grady said. Grayson waited. "Yesterday." Grady's jaw worked slightly. "When you came to me at 9:50, I should have pulled that individual for a secondary verification. I didn't, and I should have." "You had him on a verified list." "I know what I had him on. I'm telling you, I should have listened to what you were bringing me on top of the list." He kept his eyes on Grayson, which was itself a kind of admission, the direct eye contact version of owning something uncomfortable. 23 years in hotel security, I've learned to trust paperwork more than gut read, because the gut read is wrong more often than people like to think. But yours wasn't wrong, and I should have weighted that differently. You couldn't have known my background. No, but I knew your report was specific, and specific counts for something. He paused. What I'm saying is I'm sorry, and I'm glad you didn't just leave it after I dismissed it. Grayson looked at him for a moment. Phil Grady was a decent man who had done his job the way his job had taught him to do it, and had made a judgment call that turned out to be the wrong one. That was a human story. Grayson had made wrong calls himself, in his time. He didn't carry them any differently than Grady was carrying this one. I appreciate you saying it, Grayson said. We're square. Grady nodded once. How's the roof? Drains are clear. HVAC units are good. Elevator housing on the north side has a seal I want to keep an eye on. Log it and flag it for the quarterly inspection. Already did. Grady almost smiled. Back to work, Hale. Yes, sir. The rescheduled event was set for 2 o'clock. By 1, the ballroom had reached the controlled tension equilibrium of a space that has been checked and rechecked and checked again. Every entrance mapped, every staff member re-verified. The staging area swept twice by Ryan Mercer's team with the particular thoroughness of people who were not willing to have a yesterday happen again. Ryan himself was in the ballroom at 1:15 when Grayson came through on a legitimate errand. A lighting rig had thrown another fault warning, different circuit from the one he'd fixed yesterday, and the event technician had called it in with the specific urgency of someone who needed it, resolved in the next 40 minutes, or the ceiling over the stage was going to be underlit for the entire presentation. He found the fault in the secondary dimmer board, a thermal issue, the unit running hotter than spec because the load hadn't been properly distributed across the available circuits. He redistributed it, ran the diagnostic, got clean readings. He was closing the panel when Ryan appeared in the alcove. You found it? Ryan said. Thermal overload on the dimmer board. It's fixed. Grayson closed the panel housing. Stage lighting will be stable. Ryan leaned against the alcove wall. He had the look of a man who had been up since 5 and had made peace with it. Can I ask you something? Seems to be the morning for it. Yesterday, when you approached Crenshaw, you had no backup, no authority, no way to know whether the response was going to go cleanly. Ryan kept his voice even, genuinely curious rather than challenging. What was your threshold? What was the number in your head? The thing that made you decide it was time to move? Grayson thought about it for a moment. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. He shifted to the backstage corridor approach vector for the 3rd time in 45 minutes, he said, and his hand came off his hip for the first time. Up until then, he'd been in hold. When the hand came off the hip, he was moving from assessment to preparation. Ryan was quiet, processing it. You read him transitioning from surveillance to active. Yes. And you had about a 60-second window before he was in a position to use it. 45, maybe. Ryan exhaled through his nose. I had him on my radar, too. I clocked him 15 minutes before you moved, but I had him categorized as suspicious observe, not suspicious act. He paused. What made you read him differently? The hand, Grayson said. The rest of the behavioral indicators supported the assessment, but the hand was the tell. It's a very specific position, the right-hand carry posture on someone who isn't used to concealing a fixed blade. They hold it like they're going to use it, not like they're carrying it. He looked at Ryan. You'd have caught it. You had less time on him than I did. Maybe, Ryan said. It was not false modesty, just honest uncertainty, which Grayson found more reassuring than confidence would have been. They stood for a moment in the alcove, the two of them, with the noise of the ballroom preparations surrounding them on both sides. "Where did you work before?" Ryan asked. "Donovan Associates. Before that, a 2-year contract with a federal security advisory program that I can't discuss, and that is also very much in the past." Ryan stared at him. "You were at Donovan? For 6 years?" "I know people at Donovan. We've crossed staffing pools a few times." He was recalibrating visibly, fitting the new information against the existing picture. "Why'd you leave?" "Personal reasons." Ryan looked at him for a moment. The particular look of someone who understands that personal reasons in this field almost always means a loss of some kind, and who has the professional decency not to push on it. "Understood," he said. "You've been with the Vaughn Group how long?" Grayson asked. 2 years. Before that, I was principal coverage for a financial group in Boston." He paused. "She's not an easy client. She moves fast, she doesn't like being managed, and she thinks threat assessment is something that happens to other people." "Until it doesn't." "Until it doesn't," Ryan agreed. "Yesterday changed that, I think. She was quiet last night. Her assistant said she barely touched dinner. She doesn't do that. She's the kind of person who eats a full meal in the middle of a crisis because she thinks not eating is giving the crisis too much power." Grayson considered this. "She's going through the event today anyway." "She is. I tried to recommend another postponement. She said—" Ryan almost smiled, the slight involuntary kind. "She said the people who wanted to stop her had already had their shot, and she wasn't giving them a second one. That's not entirely irrational." "I know. It's also not entirely rational." He straightened off the wall. "I should get back to the sweep. You'll be around this afternoon?" "My shift runs till 4. "Good." Ryan extended his hand. Grayson shook it, a brief, solid grip, the kind between two people who have reached the same honest conclusion about each other without much ceremony. "If anything reads wrong to you today, I'll find you." Ryan nodded and walked back into the ballroom. Grayson packed his tools and went back to work. The event started at 2:14, 14 minutes behind schedule, because one of the senior investors had arrived late, and Madeline had made the call to hold the start rather than begin without him. It was the kind of call that looked like courtesy and was also strategy. The investor in question controlled a significant portion of the institutional backing the Vaughn Group needed for the platform's second phase rollout, and starting without him would have been a precise and permanent insult dressed up as an accident. Grayson knew this because Carter Novak, the chief of staff, had explained it in some detail to a junior team member in the corridor outside the ballroom while Grayson was running a check on the emergency lighting conduit nearby. Carter hadn't noticed him. Most people didn't notice him when he was working. It was one of the more useful aspects of the uniform. He completed the conduit check, clear, no issues, and moved toward the east side of the building, where he had a legitimate work order on the 6th floor involving a balcony door mechanism that had been sticking since the previous weekend. He was halfway to the elevator when Detective Cook appeared from the lobby direction, moving at the moderate urgency of someone with specific news. "Hale." Cook raised a hand. "Got a minute?" Grayson stopped. "What's happened?" "We've got a preliminary ID on who contracted Crenshaw." Cook came level with him and lowered his voice. Not from necessity, the lobby was relatively quiet at this hour, but from habit. "Name is Warren Lyle, 54, former partner at a private equity group called Sutter Fenn Capital. He brought a lawsuit against the Vaughn Group 2 years ago over an acquisition deal that he claimed was structured to freeze him out of a partnership arrangement. He lost the suit." Cook looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because if he'd won, he'd have had a legal resolution. People who contract threats have usually run out of legal options." Grayson paused. "Or they think they have. He lost the suit 14 months ago. The settlement terms were sealed, but we've been told the outcome was not in his favor." Cook's mouth thinned slightly. "We're looking at him for the contracting, but the chain is layered. Crenshaw was 3 steps removed from Lyle through a network of cutouts. It'll take time to build it." "Do you think there's a second attempt being planned?" Cook was quiet for a beat. We think it's possible. We flagged it with Mercer's team. The event security today is... I'm aware of what they've done. It's solid. Grayson looked at him. You're telling me this because? Because you spotted something yesterday that 4 trained professionals missed, and you've been in this building all morning, and if anything reads wrong to you... Cook paused, seeming slightly uncomfortable with what he was about to say. I'd rather have your rid than not have it. Grayson absorbed this. Coming from a detective, it was a meaningful thing to say. It was also slightly uncomfortable in the way that being seen clearly always is, when you've spent a significant amount of time trying not to be. I'll be on the east side of the building for the next hour, Grayson said. If something reads wrong, I'll call you directly. I appreciate it. One thing, Cook raised an eyebrow. Warren Lyle. Do you know his current location? We have him in the city. Confirmed sighting at his apartment at 9 a.m. Cook studied him. You think he'd be here personally? Probably not. But people who feel like they're out of options sometimes make personal decisions that don't hold up to analysis. He met the detective's gaze. It's worth keeping in mind. Cook nodded slowly. I'll have a unit sitting on his building. Good. Grayson went to the elevator and rode it to the 6th floor and fixed the sticking door mechanism and thought about Warren Lyle and what a man looked like when the last lever he had left to pull was the one you weren't supposed to pull. The Vaughn Group presentation ran for approximately 90 minutes. Grayson knew this because the hotel's internal communication system updated the event status at regular intervals, and because at 3:57 he was in the service corridor adjacent to the ballroom running a check on the fire suppression system's secondary sensor array, another legitimate task scheduled weeks ago, which happened to place him approximately 40 feet from the main ballroom exit at the precise moment the event ended. He was not waiting. He was working on the fire suppression sensor. That it took him slightly longer than the diagnostic required was a function of thoroughness, and thoroughness was a professional virtue. The ballroom doors opened at 4:03 and the guests began filtering out. He could hear them before he saw them, the specific sound of a room full of people who had just watched something that met their expectations, the lighter, faster quality of conversation that follows a successful pitch. Someone laughed, a genuine laugh, not a social one. That told him something. Through the partially open service door, he caught a glimpse of the stage. Madeline Vaughn was still at the podium, speaking to 2 people who had stayed behind, one of whom was the late-arriving investor, whom Grayson had clocked during the entry at 2:12, and who was now leaning toward her with the specific body language of engagement rather than courtesy. His hand was gesturing. She was nodding. It had gone well then. He completed the sensor check, logged it, and began walking the sensor array toward the north end of the corridor. He heard footsteps behind him. Grayson? He turned. Madeline Vaughn was standing in the service corridor doorway, still in the clothes she'd presented in, a slight flush along her cheekbones from the room and the lights, and probably also the adrenaline that came from standing in front of the people who controlled the future of your company and saying the thing you'd spent months preparing to say. She looked tired. She also looked like a person who had just done something hard and done it well, and who was not quite ready to stop feeling that yet. Ms. Vaughn, Grayson said. The event was good, she said. Better than good, actually. Reinhardt, the investor who was late, he stayed after. She seemed to be sharing this the way you share news with someone who was part of the day, even tangentially. He wants to discuss increasing his participation in the second phase rollout. That's good news? It is. She looked at him for a moment. Ryan told me what you said this morning, about the second-day window. She paused. He implemented everything. I don't know if anything would have happened today without the enhanced measures, but I wanted you to know the measures were taken. I know. He told me. She nodded. Her hands were at her sides, and there was a quality to her stillness that told him she had something else to say and was deciding how to say it. Madeline Vaughn, he had observed, was a person who was very comfortable talking when she knew what she wanted to communicate, and less comfortable in the territory between knowing what she felt and finding the words for it. I've been trying to understand something since yesterday, she said finally. You flagged that man twice and were dismissed twice, and then you went back anyway. And when the moment came, you moved. She looked at him steadily. A lot of people, most people, would have let it go after the second dismissal, would have decided that it wasn't their job and the people with authority had made their call. She paused. Why didn't you? He thought about the question. It deserved a real answer, not a modest deflection. Because I could see it, he said. And seeing something and walking away from it because it's not technically your responsibility is, he paused, finding the honest version of it. It's a kind of lying, to yourself mostly, and I've never been comfortable with that kind of lie. She was quiet for a moment. Even when no one is going to know you saw it? Especially then. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away. Not dismissively, but in the way people look away when something lands harder than they expected and they need a second to absorb it. I owe you more than a thank you, she said. I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that you don't seem to be the kind of person who responds well to gestures designed to address that kind of debt. Grayson almost smiled. You're not wrong about that. So I won't make one. She straightened slightly, and the posture was the one he'd first seen yesterday. Precise, armored, ready. But the armor sat differently now. I'll just say that I'm glad you were in the building. I'm glad you didn't stop watching when you probably should have. And I'm sorry I made your day harder before it got to that point. You already apologized for that. I know. I wanted to say it again when I wasn't also dealing with... She gestured slightly, a small motion that encompassed the investigation, the rescheduled event, the whole machinery of the past 24 hours. He nodded. Accepted. Again. She started to turn back toward the ballroom, then stopped. Your daughter, the one you mentioned, is she okay? After yesterday, you were late to pick her up. The question surprised him, not in a way he showed, but internally, in the small recalibration that happens when someone asks about something you didn't expect them to have noticed or retained. She's fine, he said. She had a rice-related dispute at school yesterday that she handled on her own terms. Madeline blinked. A rice-related dispute. It's a whole thing. She's fine. Something in Madeline's expression shifted. The barest softening, the kind that happens involuntarily and is gone before it fully arrives. Good, she said. That's good. She went back into the ballroom. Grayson stood in the service corridor for a moment, the fire suppression sensor array in his hand, the afternoon moving past outside the building's walls. He thought about what she'd asked. Why didn't you stop? And about the answer he'd given, which was true, but was also only part of the truth. The other part was harder to articulate. It was something about the specific quality of that morning, the way the light had come in through the ballroom's east windows and landed on the man in the catering uniform who was standing still in a room full of motion, and the way Grayson had looked at that and known, in the wordless way that the body knows things before the mind has labeled them, that the stillness was wrong. He had learned to trust that knowing. He had paid tuition in the old life for the lesson that ignoring it was always the more expensive choice. He checked his watch. 3 minutes past 4. His shift was over. He packed his tools, logged out of the work order system, and headed for the staff exit. The hotel settled around him, processing another day. The guests who had come and gone, the event that had happened and the one that hadn't, the rooms being turned over for new arrivals who would sleep in them tonight without any awareness of what the afternoon had contained. That was fine. That was how it was supposed to work. Grayson pushed through the staff door and walked toward the parking lot in the cooling afternoon, thinking about dinner and about Lily and about whether he had enough chicken left for the rice, and about nothing else at all. Warren Lyle's arrest came on a Thursday. Grayson learned about it the way he learned about most things that happened outside his immediate orbit, indirectly, through channels that reached him without being aimed at him. In this case, it was a text from Detective Cook at 7:51 in the morning, 3 days after the rescheduled event, while Grayson was in the staff parking lot finishing the last of his coffee before his shift started. The text said, Lyle taken into custody this morning. Conspiracy to commit assault, solicitation, wire fraud related to the contracting. DA's office is confident on the charges. Thought you'd want to know. Grayson read it twice. Then he typed back, appreciate the update. And he finished his coffee and went inside. He thought about Warren Lyle for approximately 4 minutes. Not with satisfaction, exactly, but with the particular quiet that comes when a loose thread gets tied off. Lyle was 54 years old and had spent 2 years building a structure of resentment and legal frustration into something that had nearly gotten a person killed in a hotel ballroom. That was a long time to carry something that dark. Grayson didn't understand it, but he understood the machinery of it. The way a man could convince himself, step by incremental step, that the thing he was planning was a form of justice rather than what it actually was. He'd seen it before. In the old work, you saw the downstream consequences of that kind of reasoning regularly enough that it stopped surprising you and started just being part of the landscape. He put his phone away and went to find the work order for the morning. The investigation had moved fast, partly because Paul Crenshaw, the man who had pulled the knife, had eventually decided that silence was costing him more than cooperation. He'd spent 36 hours saying nothing, and then, according to what Cook told Grayson in a brief hallway conversation 2 days after the event, had asked for a deal and started talking. The chain between Crenshaw and Lyle ran through 2 intermediaries, a former business contact of Lyle's who operated in the gray margins of corporate dispute resolution, and a second individual who functioned as a contractor broker, the kind of person who matched people with problems to people willing to solve them for a fee. Both intermediaries had been identified. One had cooperated immediately. The other had needed slightly more persuasion. The picture that emerged was this. Warren Lyle had lost his lawsuit against the Vaughn Group 14 months ago, and the sealed settlement had required him to relinquish an equity stake he'd valued at somewhere between $8 and $12 million, depending on whose valuation you used. He had believed, with the specific certainty of a man whose professional identity was built on never being wrong, that he had been cheated. He had pursued every legal avenue available to him and run out of them. And then, at some point in the months that followed, he had made a decision that crossed a line he probably hadn't fully seen until he was already past it. Grayson thought about that a lot, in the way he thought about things that happened in the background of his mind while he was doing other work, fixing things, moving through the hotel's corridors, driving Lily to school, cooking dinner. He thought about the specific moment when Lyle must have shifted from anger into something more organized and operational. That moment was always the dangerous one. Most people felt the anger and let it metabolize into bitterness or resignation or the slow deflation of grievance that time produces. Some people took the anger and started building with it. Warren Lyle had built. What he'd built had ended with a knife on a ballroom floor and his own arrest and whatever came next, which was not going to be good for him. Grayson did not feel sorry for him. He also didn't feel the need to hate him. Both responses seemed like more than the situation deserved. On the Friday after the arrest, 5 days after the event, Phil Grady stopped by the maintenance office where Grayson was filing a weekly report and said that the hotel's general manager, a man named Dennis Farr, wanted to speak with him at his convenience. "What about?" Grayson asked. "He didn't tell me specifically. I'd guess it's related to the event." Grady paused in the doorway. He used the word commendation, I believe. Grayson looked up from the report. "Tell him I appreciate it, but I don't need a commendation." Grady looked at him with the expression of a man who has learned not to be surprised by Grayson Hale, but has not fully stopped being surprised. "You could at least go have the conversation." "I could," Grayson agreed. He went back to the report. Grady sighed and left. Grayson finished the report, thought about it for a moment, and then walked to the general manager's office and knocked on the open door. Dennis Farr was a man in his early 60s who had the specific professional warmth of someone who had spent 4 decades in hospitality and had genuinely liked most of it. He had a good handshake and an office full of framed photographs of hotel events and a small credenza behind his desk covered in coffee cups in various states of being empty. He stood when Grayson came in, which was a small thing and also not a small thing. "Mr. Hale, thanks for coming." He gestured to the chair across his desk. "Sit, please." Grayson sat. Farr sat back down, and for a moment he seemed to be choosing from several versions of what he wanted to say. "I want to be direct with you," Farr said. "I'd prefer that," Grayson said. "What you did in that ballroom, the observation, the reporting, the response, that reflects extremely well on this hotel and on you personally. The Vaughn Group has communicated their appreciation to our ownership group, and I've been asked to relay that formally." He paused. But beyond the institutional piece, I want you to know personally that I think you likely saved someone's life in this building, and I don't take that lightly. Grayson listened to this without expression, not coldly. He understood what was being offered and why, and he respected the sincerity of it. He just didn't know what to do with it that wouldn't feel performative. I appreciate you saying it, he said. I also want to say that the next time you flag a security concern, to Grady or to anyone on my staff, it will be taken seriously, immediately and completely. Farr's tone was direct. That shouldn't have required the outcome it required for me to be able to say it. Phil handled it reasonably, Grayson said. He worked with the information he had. He did. And the information he had didn't include context that would have changed his response. That's on me as much as anyone. We don't have a protocol for how to weight the judgment of a maintenance technician who happens to have 15 years of executive protection experience. Farr paused. We're building one. Grayson looked at him. That's a more useful response than a commendation. Farr almost smiled. I thought you might think so. He folded his hands on the desk. Is there anything you need from the hotel? Anything I can offer that would... I want to do right by you, Grayson, within reason and within what I'm able to. Grayson thought about it for a genuine moment, not a polite one. There's a 6th-floor room that's been flagging intermittent electrical issues for 3 months, and the work order keeps getting deprioritized because it's not currently occupied. I'd like it bumped up before the issue develops into something expensive. Farr blinked. Then he leaned forward and wrote something on a notepad. Done. Anything else? Lily's school does a career day in the spring. A parent came last year and talked about hotel management. The kids liked it. He paused. If you were ever willing to do that, it would mean something to her. Farr set down his pen and looked at Grayson with the expression of a man who had expected a request and had gotten something he didn't have a category for. I would be happy to do that, he said. Genuinely. Thank you. Grayson stood. That's all I need. He shook Farr's hand and went back to work. He didn't hear from Madeline Vaughn directly for several days after the event. She had checked out of the Meridian Grand on the Thursday morning of Lyle's arrest. Ryan had told him, briefly in passing, and returned to her company's offices across the city, where the business of managing a successful platform launch and its aftermath presumably required her full attention. Grayson did not expect to hear from her again. The situation had resolved, the professional connection between them was tangential at best, and Madeline Vaughn was a person with a city full of demands on her time and energy. He was a maintenance technician at a hotel she had stayed in during a difficult 2 days. That was the whole of it. He was fine with that. He was also not entirely surprised when, on the following Tuesday, an envelope appeared in the internal mail tray outside the maintenance office with his name on it in handwriting that was small and precise and clearly belonged to a person who had opinions about penmanship. He opened it. Inside was a single note card. No Vaughn Group letterhead, no formal branding, just the card, and on it, I told Reinhardt the platform was built on the principle that the most important systems are the ones nobody notices until they fail. He thought I meant the software. I meant something else. MV. Below that, a phone number. Grayson read it twice. Then he turned the card over, as though there might be more on the back. There wasn't. He put the card in his jacket pocket and thought about it for most of the morning. Bois. He called the number that evening, after dinner, after Lily was in bed. He sat at the kitchen table with the card in front of him and dialed, half expecting to get an assistant or a voicemail system with professional instructions about preferred contact methods. Madeline answered on the second ring. I wasn't sure you'd call, she said. I wasn't sure either, he said. The note was... He paused. It was a good note. I meant it. I know you did. He turned the card over in his hand. How's the launch aftermath? Controlled chaos, the Reinhardt conversation went well. 3 other investors have been in contact since the event. A pause. The product is good. When it's actually good, the rest is mostly just noise management. And the Lyle situation. My legal team is handling the civil side. The criminal piece is in the DA's hands. Her voice was even, but there was something under it. Not fear, exactly, More like the particular weariness of someone who has spent time confronting the fact that a person wanted to hurt them and is still processing what that means. Cook told me the full chain yesterday, all three of them, the intermediaries, Crenshaw, how it was structured. She paused. It's strange to hear the logistics of something like that. The number of steps between a man deciding he wants to hurt you and the moment someone actually shows up in your ballroom. It usually is that many steps, Grayson said. More, sometimes. That's what makes it hard to see coming before it arrives. You saw it. I saw one step, the last one. He was quiet for a moment. I missed all the ones before it, same as everyone else. She seemed to consider this. That's an honest way to put it. It's the accurate way. A brief silence on the line. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence between people who are comfortable enough to let a moment breathe without filling it. Can I ask you something? Madeline said. Seems to be what people do with me lately. A small sound on her end, not quite a laugh, but adjacent to it. The morning after the event, when you told me to be careful about the second-day window, you knew something then. You'd already talked to Cook, or Cook told me about the contracting model that morning, but I would have said the same thing without it. When a contracted attempt fails, the person who paid for it still has a problem. That doesn't go away just because the contractor got caught. You were thinking about my safety. I was thinking about the logic of the situation. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said, they're not. Another silence. Ryan told me your background, Madeline said. Not everything. He said there were things you hadn't told him and he wasn't going to speculate. But the Donovan piece, the federal contract work. She paused. You were very good at what you did. I was. And you walked away from it. I did. She didn't ask why. He noticed that. The specific restraint of not asking something she probably wanted to ask. He found he respected it. I walked away from it because I had to, he said anyway. My daughter needed a father who was present and consistent and in the same place every day. The other work couldn't give her that. He paused. I made that choice without regret, but I want to be clear that it was a choice, not a defeat. There's a difference. I know there is, Madeline said quietly. He thought she probably did know. Whatever had built Madeline Vaughn into the person she was, and he didn't know the specifics, but he could read the outline of it in the way she moved through the world. It had involved choices that other people had probably characterized as sacrifices. She'd learned the distinction the same way most people learned it, from the inside. Your daughter, she said. The rice dispute. Resolved. The other kid apologized, apparently. Unsolicited. Good. How old did you say she was? 8. 8 is a hard age. She said it with a certainty that suggested she remembered it clearly. The world starts having opinions about you, and you haven't fully decided what to do about that yet. She's figuring it out. She sounds like she's doing fine. A pause. She has a good father. Grayson was quiet for a moment. That sentence landed differently than compliments usually landed for him. Not the professional kind which he could receive and set aside without much friction. This one had a different weight. He wasn't sure what to do with it, except acknowledge it honestly. I try to be, he said. Some days are better than others. That's all any of it is, Madeline said. Some days better than others. He heard something in the background on her end. A notification sound, the distant voice of someone speaking, the machinery of her world reasserting itself. I should let you go, he said. Probably. She didn't move immediately, though. I want to say something before you do. He waited. I've been thinking about the hallway, she said, by the VIP entrance, the way I spoke to you. He started to say something, and she continued before he could. I know I've apologized. I know you've accepted it. I'm not reopening it. I just want to say that it's been sitting with me not because I'm punishing myself for it, but because it was revealing. About a habit I have. She paused. I categorize people quickly. I make assessments, and I move on, and I don't always leave room for what I've missed. It's efficient, and it's also wrong. You were a very clear example of what it costs. He considered this for a moment. You're not the first, he said. You won't be the last. That doesn't make it acceptable. No, it doesn't. He paused. But people can learn things, even efficient people. She was quiet for a moment, and he thought he could hear the shape of a small smile in the silence, though he couldn't have said exactly why. Get some sleep, Grayson, she said. You too. He hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a while afterward, the note card on the table in front of him, the city quiet outside the window. From Lily's room, the even sound of breathing that meant she was deep under. He turned the card over once more. Read the note. Thought about systems that nobody notices until they fail, and about the ones that work because someone is paying attention to them even when no one is watching. He put the card in the kitchen drawer, the one where he kept things he wasn't sure what to do with, but wasn't ready to throw away, and went to bed. The next morning was a Saturday, which meant no school and a slower start. Lily woke at 7:30, late for her, evidence of a deep sleep, and came into the kitchen in her socks and her pajamas with the rabbit under one arm, trailing the specific groggy energy of a child who had not yet fully returned to the waking world. She looked at him. You're already dressed, she said with faint accusation. I went for a run. She sat at the table and regarded this information with the suspicion it apparently deserved. You went running on a Saturday? I go running sometimes. Not on Saturdays. He set a glass of orange juice in front of her. First time for everything. She picked up the juice and drank half of it and set it down and looked at him with the particular attention she deployed when she thought something was not being fully explained to her. Are you okay? He looked at her. 8 years old and already asking the right questions. Yeah, Lil. I'm okay. Did something happen at work? A few things happened at work. They're all handled now. She seemed to weigh this. Then she nodded, apparently deciding to accept the answer, and picked up her juice again. Can we have pancakes? We can have pancakes. With the blueberries? If we have blueberries. He checked the refrigerator. We have blueberries. Good. She settled back in her chair with the satisfaction of someone whose morning had just arranged itself correctly. Dad? Yeah. When you go running, do you think about stuff, like in your head while you're running? He pulled the flower from the cabinet. Sometimes. Why? She turned the juice glass in a slow circle on the table, a habit she had when she was thinking. Because my teacher says some people do that. Think about things better when they're moving. She said it's called, like, processing. She wrinkled her nose slightly at the word. I think I might be like that. Because when I walk home from school, I figure out stuff I didn't figure out during the day. Grayson looked at her. Something in his chest did the thing it sometimes did when she said something that landed at an unexpected angle, a quiet shift, like furniture settling. Yeah, he said, I think you probably are like that. She nodded as though this confirmed something she'd already suspected. What do you figure out when you run? He measured out the flower, thinking about it. Whether things are okay, he said finally. Whether I've been paying attention to the right things. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to most questions that she'd asked seriously. And are they? Okay? He looked at her, at Lily, with her rabbit and her socks and her juice, and her 8-year-old philosopher's mind, sitting at his small kitchen table in his small apartment on a Saturday morning, with the city quiet outside and the blueberries in the refrigerator, and the day ahead of them with nothing in it except whatever they decided to put in it. Yeah, he said. They are. She smiled, quick and uncomplicated, the smile of someone who had received confirmation of something they mostly already believed. Then she propped her chin on her hand and watched him make the batter, and the morning moved forward the way mornings do when nothing is required of them except to be what they are. On Monday, Cook called. Wanted to give you the final update, the detective said. Lyle's attorney entered a preliminary not guilty on his behalf, which is standard. The DA's case is strong, but the wire transfers alone are going to be hard to explain. We're looking at a plea arrangement within 60 days, probably. Crenshaw. He'll get a reduced charge for cooperation. Still looking at significant time, but not maximum. A pause. The two intermediaries are in separate negotiations. The whole thing is going to be quiet and procedural, and not at all like a TV show, which is how these things actually go. Good, Grayson said. I also wanted to say, for what it's worth, that your read on the second-day window was correct. We found evidence that Lyle made contact with a secondary individual the morning after Crenshaw was arrested. The contact went nowhere because by then we were already building toward the arrest warrant, but the intent was there. Grayson absorbed this. Glad the coverage was solid. Mercer's team was good. The enhanced protocol you recommended made a difference in how we managed the perimeter. He paused. You think about coming back to this kind of work at all? Grayson was quiet for a moment. It was the second time in a week someone had asked him a version of that question. No, he said, but I appreciate you asking. Didn't think so. Worth trying. Cook's voice carried the dry warmth of someone who has made peace with not always getting the answer he was hoping for. Take care of yourself, Hale. You too, Detective. He hung up and sat for a moment at the maintenance office desk, the daily work orders in front of him, the hotel operating in its usual key around him. The routine of it, the familiar weight of a day that needed its small tasks done, its small systems maintained, felt less like ordinary than it had before the week started. He wasn't sure when that had shifted. Somewhere between the ballroom and the Saturday morning pancakes, probably. Between the knife on the carpet and the blueberries in the refrigerator. Between the person he had been and the person he had chosen to become, and the growing understanding that those two things did not have to be in conflict with each other as much as he had thought. He picked up the first work order of the morning, a faulty latch on a fire door in the east stairwell. Simple job, 20 minutes, maybe less. He picked up his tools and went to fix it. The fire door latch took 17 minutes to fix. Grayson logged it, noted the replacement part number in the work order system, and moved on to the next task. A ceiling tile on the 8th floor had water damage from a pipe sweat issue that maintenance had been monitoring since February. The tile needed replacing and the insulation behind it needed to be checked. He pulled the tile, checked the insulation, dry, the pipe sweat had resolved with the temperature change, and put in a new tile, pressing it into its grid with the practiced motion of someone who has done the same thing enough times that the hands know the job before the brain has finished issuing the instruction. Ordinary work. The kind that keeps the building running and goes completely unnoticed unless it stops being done. He had been thinking about that word, ordinary, more than usual in the days since the Cook call. Not with anxiety, exactly. More with the specific attentiveness of someone who has picked up an object they've owned for years and is noticing, for the first time, how much it actually weighs. The ordinary had been a choice. That was the part people didn't understand when they looked at him. When they looked at a 32-year-old man with his background and his skills pushing a maintenance cart through a hotel corridor, and assembled it into a story about a person who had failed at something larger and landed here. The story was wrong. The ordinary had been the destination, not the consolation prize. He had pointed himself at it deliberately, with both hands, and he had built it piece by piece in the 14 months since he'd walked through the Meridian Grand service entrance for the first time. What the week had done, what the ballroom and the knife and the phone calls and the note card in the kitchen drawer had done, was not unsettle that choice. It had clarified it, reminded him that the ordinary wasn't the absence of everything he'd been before. It was the structure he'd built around what mattered most, so that what mattered most could actually breathe. He pressed the last corner of the ceiling tile into its grid and climbed down from the stepladder. His phone buzzed, a text from the school. Not the counselor this time, just the automated reminder about the upcoming spring calendar. Parent-teacher conferences in 3 weeks. Career day in 6. He thought about Dennis Farr and his notepad and the way the general manager had written down career day like it was a board resolution. He texted back the confirmation code and went to find his next work order. Ryan Mercer came by the hotel on a Wednesday, 11 days after the event. He was not there on official business. The Vaughn group had checked out and the formal engagement with the hotel was complete. He was there because he had called ahead and asked if Grayson was working, and Grayson had said yes, and Ryan had said he'd stop by around noon if that was all right. They ate lunch in the staff break room, which Ryan handled with the unpretentious ease of someone who has spent enough time on the working side of events to feel at home in back-of-house spaces. He brought sandwiches from a place 2 blocks over, and good ones, the kind where someone had made actual decisions about the bread, and set them on the table without ceremony. "I'm taking a new contract," Ryan said, between the first and second half of his lunch. Long-term principal coverage. Corporate. I can't say who. Understood. I wanted to tell you before you heard it through the professional network, which apparently you're back on, whether you want to be or not. He looked at Grayson levelly. Donovan's been talking to people. Grayson set down his sandwich. About what? About you. Not in a harmful way. He's not burning you. I think he's trying to make sure the right people know you exist in case you ever decide you want to. Ryan paused. He's proud of you. In his specific way, which involves telling other professionals that you're the best assessment reader he's ever worked with, and that you're currently unavailable, which in that world basically functions as an advertisement. Grayson was quiet for a moment. Marcus Donovan doing Marcus Donovan things. The man had always operated on the principle that talent was something to be maintained in the ecosystem, even when it was temporarily dormant, and that the best thing you could do for someone who'd stepped back was to keep the door visibly open without making a point of it. I'll call him, Grayson said. Tell him to dial it back. You could, or you could let him. Ryan looked at him with the straight gaze of someone who has thought this through before arriving. I'm not going to push you on it, but I want to say one thing, and then I'll leave it alone. Go ahead. What you did in that ballroom, the observation, the patience, the response, that's not something that disappears because you put on a different uniform. It's in you. It goes where you go. He paused. I'm not saying you should go back to full principal coverage. I'm not saying anything about your life or your daughter or the choices you've made. I'm saying that the skill set you have is real and it is rare, and there might be ways to use it that don't require you to give up what you've built. That's all. Grayson looked at him. Ryan held his gaze without pressure, without sales pitch, just a straight delivery of a thing he'd decided to say. You done? Grayson said. I'm done. All right. He picked up his sandwich again. How's the search for the new contract? Ryan accepted the redirect without comment. Complicated. The principal has specific requirements about the composition of the team, which makes staffing interesting. He paused. I'm actually short one person with assessment background. If you ever... Ryan. I said I was done. I'm done. He almost smiled. Eat your sandwich. They finished lunch in the comfortable rhythm of two people who don't need to perform anything for each other. When Ryan stood to leave, he shook Grayson's hand again, the same grip as before, no longer the grip of strangers, and said, She's doing well, if you're wondering, back at full speed. Reinhardt increased his position in the rollout by 40%. I wasn't wondering, Grayson said. I know you weren't. Ryan picked up the paper bag the sandwiches had come in, folded it neatly, and put it in the recycling bin. That's why I told you. He left. Grayson sat in the break room for a few more minutes, finishing his coffee, thinking about skill sets and uniforms and the permeable border between who you used to be and who you've decided to become. The Vaughn Group announcement went public on a Thursday. Grayson saw it because Dee from housekeeping had the news on her phone in the break room and made a sound of recognition. That's the woman who was here, Dee said, holding up the phone. The screen showed a headline about the platform launch and a photograph of Madeline Vaughn at a podium. Not the Meridian Grand's podium, a different one, somewhere that had cleaner lighting and a larger crowd. The demanding one. That's her, Grayson said. Big company, big money. Dee looked at the phone for a moment, then at Grayson. You were involved in that whole thing, weren't you? The thing that happened in the ballroom. I was on shift, he said. Dee gave him the particular look she gave people when she knew she was getting less than the full story and had decided not to push it. Well, she said, I hope she sends the hotel a nice thank you gift. We deserve it. Grayson drank his coffee. We do, he agreed. The thank you, when it came, did not take the form Dee was imagining. There was no gift basket or ceremonial gesture. Instead, 2 weeks after the event, the hotel received a formal communication from the Vaughn Group indicating that they intended to book the Meridian Grand exclusively for their next 3 major events: their annual investor summit, a product integration conference, and a private board dinner. The combined booking value was, by Phil Grady's estimate when he mentioned it in passing to Grayson in the parking lot one morning, Enough to make Farr very happy for a very long time. The hotel was pleased, the booking was good for everyone, and somewhere in the structure of it, in the fact that Madeline Vaughn had returned to the building where something frightening had happened to her and had chosen to keep returning to it, Grayson thought he could read something about the way certain people move through the world, not pretending that hard things didn't happen, just refusing to let hard things be the last word about a place or a person. He found that he respected that. It was consistent with what he had observed of her, which was a person who had significant flaws and significant strengths, and who was, slowly, imperfectly, in the way real change actually happens, trying to let the strengths lead more often. He thought about what she had said on the phone. I categorize people quickly. I make assessments, and I move on, and I don't always leave room for what I've missed. The self-awareness had been real. Whether it translated into changed behavior over time was something he had no way of knowing and no stake in, except the general human interest in watching people become more honest versions of themselves. He hoped it did. That was the whole of his investment in it. Career day at Lily's school fell on a Friday in late spring, exactly 6 weeks after Dennis Farr had written it in his notepad, and Farr arrived at 8:45 in the morning in a good suit with a folder of materials and the practiced ease of a man who has given presentations in rooms much more intimidating than a third-grade classroom. Grayson wasn't there. His shift had started at 7, and he had work orders that needed covering. But Mrs. Petrie sent him a photograph at 10:15, Farr standing at the front of the classroom with an expression of genuine engagement, surrounded by third-graders who were apparently asking him questions with the uninhibited directness that 8-year-olds brought to everything. And in the front row, her chin propped on her hands, her rabbit nowhere in evidence because school was not rabbit territory, was Lily. Looking up at the speaker with the particular focused attention she brought to things she had decided to take seriously. Grayson looked at the photograph for a long time. He texted Mrs. Petrie back. "Thank you." She replied with a small emoji of a star, which was perhaps more feeling than he'd expected from the exchange, and which he found unexpectedly touching. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to work. That evening, Lily described the career day with the thoroughness of someone filing a detailed report. "Mr. Farr knows the names of everyone who works in the hotel," she said, between bites of the pasta Grayson had made. "Not rice tonight," a concession to variety that Lily had requested earlier in the week. "Like, all the people in every department." He said, "When you run a hotel, you have to know your people because the hotel is only as good as the people in it." "That's true," Grayson said. He also said that hotels are they're like living things because they need maintenance all the time. And if you ignore one part, it affects the other parts. She considered this. "That's kind of like what you do." "It is kind of like what I do." He said maintenance is one of the most important departments in the whole building. She looked at him with the expression she used when she was delivering information she considered significant. He said most people don't think about it, but that's only because the maintenance people do their jobs right. Grayson set down his fork. "Did he say that specifically?" "Yeah, he pointed at the lights in the classroom and said, 'You know why those lights are on? Because somewhere in this city, there's a person who checked the circuit and made sure the electricity was running properly. And if that person didn't do their job, you'd be doing your schoolwork in the dark.'" She picked up her fork again. "I told him my dad does that." "What did he say?" "He said, 'I know. Your dad is one of the best ones we have.'" She said it simply, the way children repeat things that adults have said, without performance, without the weight of knowing what it means to have someone say that about you in front of a room full of people who don't know you. Just the words, plain and direct, the way they'd been delivered. Grayson was quiet for a moment. "Eat your pasta," he said. She ate her pasta, and he ate his, and the apartment was warm, and outside the city was doing its city things, and the evening moved through its ordinary paces. Dishes, homework, the chapter of the girl detective book, which had arrived at a satisfying complication involving a stolen compass and a locked greenhouse. When the chapter was done and Lily was settling, she said from under her covers, "Dad." "Yeah." "Do you like your job?" He thought about it. Not the quick version, the real version, the one that took a second to find because it lived slightly below the surface of easy answers. "Yeah," he said. "I do." "Why?" Because things break and then I fix them and then they work. He paused. There's something satisfying about that, about being the person who figures out what's wrong and makes it right. She was quiet for a moment working on this. But you could do other things, harder things. Mr. Farr said you have... She stopped, seeming to realize she was venturing into something she'd been told about but didn't fully understand. He didn't say specifically, just that you have a lot of skills. I do have other skills, Grayson said carefully. I used to use them in a different kind of work. Why did you stop? This was the question, the one she'd never asked directly. At 8 years old, with her covers pulled to her chin and her rabbit under her arm. She'd been circling it for months, maybe longer, the way children circle the things they most want to understand about the adults who take care of them. He sat on the edge of her bed. Because when you were born, he said, I realized that the most important work I was ever going to do was being your dad. And the old job made it hard to do that right. So I found a job that let me come home every day. At the same time. To the same place. He looked at her. That was the point of it. You were the point of it. She was quiet for a long moment. That's a lot to put on a kid, she said. He blinked. Then he felt something in his chest that was laughter, and something else combined, arriving at the same moment. Where did you hear that? Mrs. Petrie says it when parents say they do everything for their kids. She says it's a lot to put on a kid. Mrs. Petrie is very wise. So is it? He thought about it honestly. Maybe a little, he said, but it's also true. You're not responsible for the choice I made. I made it because I wanted to, because you deserved it. Those are different things. She considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. Then she nodded, slowly, the way she nodded when she'd reached a conclusion she was willing to hold on to. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. He kissed the top of her head and turned off the lamp and left her door open the usual 3 inches and stood in the hallway for a moment in the dark, feeling the specific quality of a conversation that had been needed and was now complete. 3 weeks later, Warren Lyle accepted a plea arrangement. Grayson learned about it from Cook in a text message that said, Lyle took the deal. 4 years, probable parole at 2.5. Civil suit proceeds separately. It's done on our end. Grayson texted back, Good. Then he put the phone down and did not think about Warren Lyle for the rest of the day, because Warren Lyle had made his choices and was living in their consequences, and there was nothing more to be said about it that the legal system wasn't already saying. The thing about resentment Grayson had come to believe, not because anyone had told him this, but because he had arrived at it through the specific experience of carrying it and then setting it down, was that it was a weight you volunteered to carry on behalf of someone else. Warren Lyle had built his resentment for 2 years until it had a body count in it, or nearly had. Grayson had no interest in carrying the reciprocal version. He was not going to spend the next 2 years being angry about 2 days at the Meridian Grand. The 2 days had happened. The knife had come out and gone down. Lily had had a rice dispute and resolved it, and the morning was still the morning. He put the phone in his pocket. The fire door in the east stairwell needed its 6-week check. The latch he'd fixed in March had been performing well, but he was monitoring it through the spring maintenance cycle. He found it solid, logged it clean, moved to the next item on the schedule. The hotel ran. He ran with it. June arrived warm and fast, the way June does in cities. 1 week it was still spring, and the next the heat was sitting on the pavement in the afternoons, and everyone was walking slightly slower, and the air conditioning calls were coming in from every floor. Grayson was busy. Busy was fine. Busy kept the hands occupied and the mind focused on the specific and immediate, which was where it did its best work. He had not heard from Madeline Vaughn since the phone call in April. He had not expected to and had not been waiting to. The connection between them was real, but it was also bounded by circumstance, by the particular nature of what had brought them into contact, by the differences in their worlds that a few honest conversations didn't erase. He knew this and was at peace with it. The way you're at peace with weather. It's what it is. It does what it does. He was in the loading bay on a Thursday afternoon in early June, signing off on a delivery of replacement components for the third-floor HVAC units. when one of the front desk staff came back through the service corridor with the slightly hurried look of someone carrying a message. "Mr. Hale, there's a guest asking for you at the front desk." He looked up. "By name?" "Yes, sir, a Ms. Vaughn." He handed the delivery manifest back to the driver, took a moment to wipe his hands on a shop rag, and walked through to the lobby. She was standing near the concierge desk, not the main reception counter. A deliberate choice, he thought, to be slightly away from the traffic flow, to take up less central space than she was used to taking up. She was in a jacket and dark trousers, her hair pulled back the same way it had been the first morning she'd walked down his corridor. She had a bag over one shoulder. She looked like a person who had somewhere to be in 2 hours and had made room for this first. When she saw him, she didn't do the thing people sometimes did, the performance of the moment, the orchestrated expression. She just looked at him, directly and plainly, the way she had in the corridor when she'd apologized and meant it. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. "I'm in the city for a board meeting. It ends at 4. I have a dinner at 7. She looked at him steadily. "I thought I'd stop by." "You thought you'd stop by the hotel where I work." "I thought I'd stop by and see if you had time for a cup of coffee." She paused. "Or not, if you're in the middle of something." He glanced at his watch, 2:47. His shift ended at 4. The HVAC components were in the loading bay. He had 2 hours, and the components could wait 45 minutes. "There's a coffee cart on the corner," he said. "The one on the avenue. It's nothing impressive." I don't need impressive," she said. They walked out through the main lobby, which felt to Grayson slightly strange, exiting through the front entrance in his work clothes with the Meridian Grand CEO, and out into the warm afternoon. The city was doing its 3 o'clock things. The coffee cart was busy, the line was 4 people deep, and the man running it moved with the particular efficiency of someone who had been doing this exact task in this exact spot for years and had reduced it to a form of craft. They stood in line. Madeline looked at the menu board, a laminated thing, slightly sun-faded, with the specific attention she brought to everything, as though the question of what to order deserved proper consideration. "What's good?" she asked. "The Americano. Don't get the flavored ones." "Why not?" "He makes the syrups himself, and he's not consistent with the measurements." She looked at him. "You come here often enough to know that." "Every morning." "Bitsky." She ordered the Americano. He ordered his usual, black coffee, medium, and when he reached for his wallet, she said quietly and without drama, "I've got it." And he let her, because it was a small thing, and arguing about it would make it larger than it was. They took their cups to the narrow shelf along the building wall that served as a standing counter for the overflow from the seating area, which was full. Madeline wrapped both hands around her cup, a gesture he recognized as the same one she'd probably made in hotel rooms and conference rooms for years, the particular way of holding something warm when you're thinking. "How are things?" she said. "Good. Busy. June is a high-maintenance month for HVAC systems." "I imagine." She drank her coffee, looked at the street for a moment. "The Reinhardt deal closed fully 2 weeks ago. The second phase rollout is on schedule." "I saw the announcement." "D from housekeeping?" She said it straight-faced, which was how he knew she was being slightly funny. "Actually, yes," he said. Something in her expression shifted, that involuntary softening he'd seen before, brief and real. "How's Lily?" "She's finishing 3rd grade in 2 weeks. She's decided she wants to be a marine biologist or an architect. She's not sure yet, but she thinks the skills probably overlap more than people realize." "She's not wrong," Madeline said. "Both require understanding how complex systems hold together." She paused. "Smart kid." "She's very smart. She's also 8, which means the smartness comes with a full complement of 8-year-old logic, which is its own experience." "Like what?" "Like last week she informed me that we needed to buy a second rice cooker as a backup, because what would we do if the first one broke and we wanted rice? And when I pointed out that we could make rice in a regular pot, she looked at me like I'd suggested something technically possible but deeply unreasonable." Madeline laughed, It was not the polished professional laugh, the one he'd heard her deploy in the event space, brief and social. This was a different one, smaller and more sudden, the kind that escapes before you've decided to let it. "She sounds like a handful," she said. "She's the best handful I've ever dealt with." They stood for a moment in the comfortable, specific quiet of two people who have run out of the formally structured things to say and are deciding whether to keep going past that point or wrap it up cleanly. Madeline kept going. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said, "on the phone, about seeing something and walking away from it because it's not technically your responsibility being a kind of lie." She looked at her cup. "I've been applying it to some things." "Like what?" "There's a woman on my executive team. She's talented and she works hard, and for 2 years I've been telling myself she's fully supported because I've given her resources and opportunities, but I've been not quite seeing her, not really looking at what she's dealing with or what she needs that I'm not providing." She paused. "I had a real conversation with her last month. First real one in 2 years. It was uncomfortable. She told me things I should have known and didn't because I categorize efficiently and then move on." "How'd it go?" "Hard, and then better." She looked at him. "I'm not telling you this because I want credit for it. I'm telling you because I wanted you to know that what you said, that conversation, it didn't just land and go away." He was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate you telling me. I also hired a consultant." She said this in a slightly different tone, more careful, picking the words. "A professional, for a monthly security audit of our event operations, protocols, staff verification, the whole structure." She paused. "I went back to Donovan's firm." Grayson looked at her. "He told me you'd called him, that you'd asked him to stop talking about you to people." She held his gaze. "He told me anyway. Not about the personal stuff, just that you were well and that you'd made your choices deliberately and that the hotel was lucky to have you." She paused. "I think he wanted me to know, in case it was relevant." "Marcus Donovan," Grayson said, with the tone of someone acknowledging a force of nature. "He's very good at his job." "He always was." She drank the last of her coffee, set the cup down on the shelf. Outside, the afternoon traffic moved through its patterns, and the city argued quietly with itself, as cities do. 3 weeks from now, it would be summer, properly and fully, and the school would be closed, and Lily would need camp arrangements, and the HVAC calls would intensify, and the hotel would fill with summer guests who brought their own specific needs and complications. The world, running, it didn't stop. "I should get back to the hotel," Grayson said. "The HVAC components aren't going to move themselves." "Of course." She gathered herself, not the armor, not the CEO posture, just the ordinary gathering of a person who has finished something and is orienting toward the next thing. "Thank you for the coffee recommendation. The Americano's reliable." "So I noticed." She paused, with her hand on the strap of her bag. "I'm glad you were in the building that day, Grayson." He looked at her. "You've said that." "I know. I mean something slightly different every time I say it." She looked at him for a moment, that clear, direct gaze, the one that didn't soften the world to make it easier to see. "The first time I meant I was glad you stopped the threat. The second time I meant I was glad you didn't leave after being dismissed twice. And now," she paused, "now I mean I'm glad you exist, that a person like you is somewhere in the city, doing what you do, being what you are." She looked slightly away, as though the directness had surprised even her. "That probably sounds strange." "A little," he said. "But I understand what you mean." She nodded. Then she held out her hand and he shook it. Not the brief transactional grip of strangers completing a formal exchange, but the grip of two people who have seen each other somewhat clearly and found it worth the effort. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too." She walked back toward the hotel entrance and then past it, toward wherever her board meeting had taken her, and her 7 o'clock dinner waited. And the machinery of her particular life moved forward in the way it always did. He stood at the coffee cart for a moment longer, watching the street. Then he turned and went back inside. That evening, Grayson picked up Lily at the after-school program she'd been attending on Thursdays, and she emerged through the double doors with her backpack swinging and a drawing in her hand, something that appeared to involve a very large building and a very small figure standing in front of it. "What is that?" he asked as she climbed into the car. "It's a building I designed," she said, buckling her seatbelt with the authority of someone completing an important task. "It has a maintenance center in the basement, the biggest room in the whole building, because the maintenance center is what keeps everything else working, so it should be the biggest." He looked at the drawing. The building was lopsided in the charming way that 8-year-old architecture always is, and the maintenance center was indeed enormous, nearly half the structure, rendered in careful crayon with a tiny labeled sign that said "Important" in her particular block lettering. "Who's the person?" he asked, pointing to the small figure outside. "That's the person who fixes things," she said simply. "When something breaks, they come and fix it, and the building works again." He looked at the drawing for a long moment. "It's good," he said. "I know," she said. "Can we get food on the way home? I'm really hungry." "What do you want?" "Can we get the rice thing from the place with the red sign?" "We can do that." She pressed the drawing into his hands. "Here, hold this," and looked out the window as he drove, already moving on to whatever was next in the continuous busy interior life of a person who had not yet learned to treat the present moment as anything other than exactly what it was. He drove. She talked about something that had happened at the after-school program involving a disagreement about the rules of a card game. He listened and asked the right questions, and turned left at the light, and found the place with the red sign, and parked. And they went inside together. The drawing rode on the back seat, held flat by her water bottle so it wouldn't curl. But later, much later, after the food and the drive home and the homework and the bath and the reading, the girl detective had solved the greenhouse mystery, which Lily received with the satisfied expression of someone whose faith in the protagonist had been vindicated. After all of it, Grayson sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the apartment and held the drawing in both hands and looked at it. The building with the important maintenance center. The small figure outside. The crayon lines slightly crooked. The proportions loose. The lettering emphatic. He had spent years of his life being the kind of person that other people felt safer for existing. He had been trained for it, had worked at it, had been good at it in the specific measurable ways that the profession quantified. He had walked away from it for reasons that were right and real, and that he had never regretted, even in the moments when the old reflexes fired and the old skills surfaced without invitation in a hotel ballroom with a knife on the floor. He had built something different, something smaller, in the way that all honest things are smaller than the version of them that gets told afterward. An apartment that worked, a job that let him come home, a child who designed buildings with enormous maintenance centers, because her father had told her without ever quite saying it directly that the most important work is the work that keeps everything else possible. He had not been looking for recognition. He had not been looking for the moment in the ballroom or the conversation by the coffee cart or the note card in the kitchen drawer. He had been looking for nothing except the ordinary, and the ordinary had come through for him, the way it does when you commit to it fully and without conditions. The world has a habit of noticing people who stop asking to be noticed. He didn't know if that was justice or irony, or just the particular way that things tend to go when you stop performing for an audience and start doing the actual work. Probably it was all three, tangled together the way most true things are. He set the drawing down on the table. The kitchen drawer was slightly open, the one where he kept things he wasn't ready to throw away. He could see the corner of the note card from where he was sitting. The most important systems are the ones nobody notices until they fail. He had thought when he first read it that she was being clever. He had come to think, over the weeks since, that she was being precise. He thought about Ryan Mercer eating a sandwich in the break room and saying, "The skill set you have is real and it is rare." He thought about Phil Grady saying, "I should have listened." He thought about Dennis Farr writing Career Day in his notepad like it was something that mattered, because he understood that it did. He thought about Lily telling him that the smartness and the 8-year-old logic were a package deal, which was true of everyone, at every age, in every professional context, and was something Madeline Vaughn was clearly working on accepting about herself. He thought about Warren Lyle, who had let resentment build until it had structure and weight and intention, and what it cost when a person pointed all that accumulated energy at another human being and called it justice. He didn't hate Lyle. He didn't have room for it. Hate was expensive, and the returns were terrible, and he had a daughter to raise and a building to maintain, and a morning that would come at 5:15 regardless of how he spent the night before it. He was not a perfect man. He knew his inventory. The silences he held too long, The ways he let people assume the wrong things about him because correcting them required more energy than he wanted to spend. The nights when Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet and he sat with the specific weight of doing this alone and felt the full heft of it before setting it back down. He was not without those moments. They were part of the record too. But he was also the man who had stood in a hotel ballroom and watched a threat materialize from the ordinary texture of a busy event, and had stayed focused when being dismissed had made it easier to walk away, and had moved when moving was what the moment needed. Not because anyone would know, not because there was a reward in it, but because he could see something that was wrong, and walking away from it was the kind of lie he had never been able to make peace with. That was the whole of it. That was the story. You don't always get to know if the systems you maintain are holding. You do the work, and you check the connections, and you log the readings, and you trust the process, and mostly the building runs and the lights stay on and nobody knows your name because things work the way they were supposed to. That's the job. That's what it means to care about something beyond your own visibility in it. He pushed back from the table. He put Lily's drawing on the refrigerator, not perfectly straight, slightly off-center to the left, held up by a magnet shaped like a fish that she had picked out at a museum gift shop 6 months ago. The magnet was slightly too small for the drawing and the corner drooped a little. He left it that way. It was fine. It worked. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and outside the city carried on through the middle of its night, and inside the apartment, the refrigerator hummed and the fish magnet held the drawing in place. And the maintenance center, large and important and slightly crayon-smudged, kept the building standing in the way that things do when someone has decided to pay attention to them. The morning would come. He was ready for it.